The conference room went dead silent. Charlotte Bennett, 30-year-old billionaire CEO, stared at the man in the faded blue shirt standing beside the projection screen. Her CFO had just turned pale. The investors looked confused. And this gig driver, this nobody she'd hired 3 hours ago, had just accused her most trusted executive of stealing millions. "You're insane," Daniel Mercer whispered. Mason Reed didn't flinch. He simply pointed at the screen where routing codes glowed in damning patterns. "Then explain why every failed shipment matches your maintenance windows. Want to see how this impossible morning unraveled? Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels." The alarm didn't wake Charlotte Bennett at 5:47 a.m. on Tuesday morning. Her phone did, vibrating with the kind of message that turns a good day bad before it even starts. "Marcus out sick. Can't drive today." "Sorry, Ms. Bennett." She sat up in the dark bedroom of her downtown penthouse, silk sheets pooling around her waist, and swore quietly. Not today. Not on the morning of the Hale meeting. Not when $38 million depended on her walking into that boardroom looking calm, prepared, and completely in control. Charlotte grabbed her phone and started scrolling. Her usual car service was booked solid. Of course they were, because the universe apparently enjoyed testing her. She tried 2 backup services. Nothing available. By 6:03 a.m., she was standing in her walk-in closet, pulling on a charcoal pantsuit and searching for gig drivers on an app she'd installed once and never actually used. The first 3 declined. The 4th accepted. Mason R. 4.9 stars. Black sedan. Arrives in 12 minutes. Charlotte didn't read the profile. Didn't look at the photo. She had exactly 47 minutes to get downtown, review the final presentation, and make sure every executive knew their talking points before Victor Hale arrived with his team of lawyers and financial analysts who would dissect Bennett Meridian logistics like they were performing an autopsy. She made coffee, checked her email, responded to 6 urgent messages. When her phone buzzed with "driver has arrived," she was already walking toward the elevator with her leather briefcase and a travel mug that cost more than most people spent on groceries. The morning air hit cold when she stepped outside. November in the city meant gray skies and wind that cut through expensive fabric like it was nothing. The black sedan idling at the curb looked older than she expected. Paint faded along the door panels, a small dent near the rear bumper. But she didn't care. A car was a car. The driver got out. He was tall, maybe 6'1", with dark hair that needed a trim and the kind of face that wouldn't stand out in a crowd. Wore a blue button-down shirt that had seen better days, sleeves rolled to his elbows despite the cold. Maybe 30, maybe 35. Hard to tell. "Ms. Bennett?" His voice was quiet. "That's me." She moved toward the back door. He opened it without the practiced flourish her regular driver used, just a simple pull and step aside. Charlotte slid into the back seat. The interior smelled like coffee and something else. Vanilla air freshener maybe, the cheap kind. "Meridian Tower, downtown," she said, already pulling out her tablet. "Yes, ma'am." The door closed. He got back in the front, adjusted the mirror, pulled into traffic. Charlotte stopped paying attention to him entirely. She had work to do. The presentation looked good. Her head of operations, Kim Torres, had sent the updated revenue projections at midnight. The numbers were solid. 18-month growth trajectory, expansion into 3 new regional markets, infrastructure investments that would triple cold chain capacity by next quarter. Victor Hale was a smart investor, careful, the kind who asked questions that exposed weakness. But there wasn't any weakness to expose. Not this time. Her phone rang. Daniel Mercer, her CFO. "Tell me something good," Charlotte said. "Depends on your definition." Daniel's voice came through tight, stressed. "We've got a situation with the northern shipment." Charlotte felt something cold drop in her chest. "What kind of situation?" "Temperature logs from the refrigerated trucks show a system failure overnight. Nothing catastrophic yet, but if we can't verify cold chain integrity, the whole shipment's compromised." "How much product?" 400,000 in pharmaceuticals. She closed her eyes. "Is it salvageable?" "Kim's team is working on it. We're pulling backup generators, rerouting what we can. But Charlotte," Daniel paused, "if we lose this shipment, Hale's going to see it in the quarterly report. That's not the kind of operational stability we've been selling." Then don't lose it. She kept her voice level. I want updates every 30 minutes. And Daniel, nobody mentions this in the meeting unless Hale asks directly. Understood. The call ended. Charlotte stared at her tablet without seeing it. 400,000 in product. The northern expansion was supposed to be their proof of concept, the demonstration that Bennett Meridian could scale infrastructure into new markets without the growing pains that killed most logistics companies. A system failure wasn't just expensive, it was a red flag. She pulled up the shipment tracking interface, scrolling through temperature logs and GPS coordinates. The trucks had been running fine until 2:47 a.m., then half a dozen refrigeration units showed simultaneous alerts. Not a gradual failure, not a mechanical issue, just everything dropping at once. That didn't make sense. Her phone rang again. Kim Torres this time. Please tell me you found the problem, Charlotte said. We found a problem. Kim sounded exhausted. The monitoring system shows a maintenance gap in the Northern Corridor network. During certain windows, refrigeration alerts don't transmit properly to the central hub. We're running blind for 20, sometimes 30-minute intervals. How did we not catch this during testing? Because it only happens during off-peak routing hours. And honestly, I don't think it's a bug. I think someone designed it that way. Charlotte felt her jaw tighten. Explain. The gaps align too perfectly with our transport schedules. It's like someone knew exactly when these trucks would be vulnerable and made sure we wouldn't see the alerts until it was too late. That's a serious accusation. I know. Kim hesitated. But Charlotte, we've had 3 similar incidents in the last 4 months. Smaller shipments, nothing catastrophic, but the pattern's there. Every single failure happened during one of these monitoring blackouts. The car hit a pothole. Charlotte barely noticed. Her mind was running through personnel files, security protocols, access logs. Who had the technical knowledge to manipulate their monitoring systems? Who had motive? Send me everything, she said. Logs, timestamps, routing schedules. I want it all. Already in your secure folder. Charlotte ended the call and immediately pulled up the files. Hundreds of pages of data. She started reading, scrolling through maintenance records and system reports, trying to find something, anything, that would explain how their infrastructure had been compromised. From the front seat, the driver's voice came quiet. Excuse me, ma'am? Charlotte didn't look up. What? I don't mean to overstep, but I heard you mention the Northern Corridor. Now she looked up, meeting his eyes in the rearview mirror. They were gray, she noticed. Calm. You were listening to my phone calls? Hard not to in a car this size. No apology in his voice, just fact. But the monitoring gap you're describing, is it affecting the Route 47 interchange? Charlotte felt irritation flash hot. That's confidential company information. Yes, ma'am. He returned his attention to the road. She looked back down at her tablet, tried to focus. But something about the question nagged at her. Route 47 was exactly where the failures had clustered. How would a random gig driver know that? Why did you ask about Route 47? She said. In the mirror, his expression didn't change. Because if your refrigeration units are failing near that interchange, it's probably not the units. It's the monitoring relay station at mile marker 183. There's a known issue with the backup power system during maintenance cycles. Charlotte stared at him. A known issue. Yes, ma'am. And you know this how? He was quiet for a moment, navigating around a delivery truck. Then, I used to work in logistics infrastructure before. Before what? Before other things became more important. She should have dropped it, should have ignored him, and gone back to her files. But Kim's words kept echoing in her head. I think someone designed it that way. And this driver had just identified the exact technical vulnerability her entire operations team had missed. What's your background? Charlotte asked. Does it matter? Humor me. He glanced at her in the mirror again. Systems engineering, specialized in cold chain logistics and transport monitoring architecture. Worked for Hartwell Global for 6 years, then went independent. That was a long time ago. Hartwell Global. Charlotte knew the name. They'd built half the logistics infrastructure in the country before the company dissolved in a merger. If this guy had worked there? Why are you driving for a gig service? She asked. Because the hours are flexible and I can pick my daughter up from school every day. Simple answer, no elaboration. Charlotte looked down at the file Kim had sent, found the technical specifications for their monitoring network. It had been built on modified Hartwell architecture. She knew that much from the company history. If this driver actually understood those systems, the relay station at mile marker 183, she said slowly. If that's the problem, how would someone exploit it deliberately? They wouldn't exploit the station directly. They'd route vulnerable shipments through the coverage gap during scheduled maintenance windows when the backup power cycle's off. 28 minutes every third Thursday, 32 minutes every second Tuesday. The timing's predictable if you know where to look. Charlotte felt her blood go cold. She pulled up the shipment schedule. Last night had been a second Tuesday. The refrigeration units had failed at 2:47 a.m. The maintenance cycle ended at 3:19 a.m., 32 minutes. How do you know the maintenance schedule? Her voice came out harder than she intended. Because I helped design it. He said it quietly, like it didn't matter. Back when Hartwell was building the Northern Network, the relay stations were my project. Charlotte's mind was racing now. If he was telling the truth, if he'd actually built these systems, then he would know things her own team didn't. He'd know every vulnerability, every backdoor, every flaw. What's your name? She asked. Mason Reed. She typed it into her phone, started searching. The results came back sparse. A LinkedIn profile that hadn't been updated in 5 years. A few academic papers on logistics optimization from 7 years ago. A mention in a Hartwell Global press release about a new monitoring system architecture. And a photo. Younger face, clean-shaven, wearing a suit and standing beside some kind of industrial control panel. The caption read, Mason Reed, Lead Systems Engineer, accepting the Logistics Innovation Award for breakthrough work in cold chain infrastructure monitoring. Charlotte looked up at the rearview mirror. Same gray eyes, same quiet expression. You won an award for this system, she said. Yes, ma'am. And now you're driving strangers around the city. Yes, ma'am. Why? He didn't answer right away. They were getting close to downtown now, tall buildings rising on both sides, morning traffic thickening. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. Because my daughter needed a father more than the industry needed another engineer. Charlotte didn't know what to say to that. She looked back down at her tablet, at the monitoring data, at the pattern of failures that suddenly made horrible sense. If Mason was right, if someone was deliberately routing shipments through those maintenance windows, then this wasn't operational incompetence. It was sabotage. Her phone buzzed. Daniel again. We lost the shipment, he said without preamble. Complete cold chain failure, 400,000 in product, unsalvageable. Damn it! Charlotte felt the weight of it settling. Have we notified the client? Kim's doing it now. But Charlotte, this is the 4th major loss this quarter. Hale's going to want answers. Then we'll give him answers. She glanced at the back of Mason's head. I think I know what's happening. What do you mean? Not over the phone. I'll explain in the meeting. Is everyone assembled? Waiting for you. Good, I'm 5 minutes out. She ended the call. Mason pulled up to the curb outside Meridian Tower, a gleaming structure of glass and steel that housed her company's headquarters. He put the car in park, didn't get out to open her door. Charlotte sat there for a moment, thinking. This was insane. She was about to walk into the most important investor meeting of her career, and her only lead on what might be systematic fraud inside her company had come from a gig driver she'd hired 40 minutes ago. Mr. Reed, she said. Yes, ma'am. What would you do if you were trying to identify who's routing these shipments through the monitoring gaps? He was quiet for a moment. Then, I'd look at who has access to both the routing system and the maintenance schedules. It's a small overlap. Maybe 3-4 people in your entire company. And if I wanted to prove it, you'd need the system logs. Original timestamps, not the clean data your operations team sees. The monitoring network keeps a hidden backup. It's buried in the security architecture. Most people don't even know it exists. If someone's been manipulating shipments, that backup will show every change they made. Charlotte opened her door, stepped out into the cold morning air. She looked back through the open door at Mason, still sitting quietly in the driver's seat. How much are you making today driving for the gig service? Depends on how many rides I get. Maybe $100 if it's busy. Cancel your other rides, she said. Come upstairs with me. I'll pay you $10,000 to spend the next 3 hours explaining exactly how someone is destroying my company. Mason turned in his seat, looking at her directly for the first time. His expression was unreadable. "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but I have to pick up my daughter at 3:30. I can't miss that." "Then help me until 3 and leave." Charlotte pulled out her phone. "What's your Venmo?" "This isn't a good idea." "Why not?" "Because if I'm right about what's happening, you're about to discover that someone you trust has been stealing from you for months. That's not the kind of thing you want to learn from a stranger. Better a stranger than staying blind." She met his eyes. "Please, I need someone who understands these systems. My team missed this. You caught it in a 10-minute car ride." Mason was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned off the car, pocketed the keys, and opened his door. 3:00, he said. Not a minute later, they walked into the building together, the billionaire CEO in her expensive suit and the gig driver in his faded blue shirt. The lobby security guard looked confused but stepped aside when Charlotte nodded. The elevator ride up to the executive floor was silent. When the doors opened, Charlotte's assistant Lisa looked up from her desk, saw Mason, and frowned. "Ms. Bennett, the Hale team is waiting in conference room A. Everyone's asking. Tell them I'm bringing in a technical consultant. 5-minute delay." "A consultant? We didn't have anyone scheduled." "It's handled, Lisa." Charlotte kept walking, Mason following a step behind. The executive floor was all glass walls and modern furniture, the kind of space designed to project success and control. Through the transparent walls of conference room A, Charlotte could see her team assembled. Daniel Mercer reviewing notes on his laptop, Kim Torres looking exhausted, 3 other department heads, and Victor Hale himself, 60 years old, silver hair, expensive suit, sitting at the head of the table with 2 lawyers flanking him. They all looked up when Charlotte entered. "Gentlemen, ladies, I apologize for the delay." Charlotte moved to her seat. "Before we begin the formal presentation, I need to address something urgent. This morning we experienced another cold chain failure in our northern corridor, 400,000 in product loss." Victor's expression didn't change. "Another failure." "Yes, which is why I've brought in someone who understands our infrastructure better than anyone in this room." She gestured to Mason, still standing near the door. "This is Mason Reed. He designed the original monitoring architecture our entire northern network is built on." Daniel looked at Mason, then at Charlotte. "I don't understand. We have an entire operations team." "Your operations team missed a critical vulnerability." Charlotte pulled up the monitoring data on the conference room screen. "Mr. Reed, would you explain what you told me in the car?" Every eye in the room turned to Mason. He stood there in his faded shirt, looking completely out of place among the suits and lawyers, and for a moment Charlotte wondered if she'd just made a catastrophic mistake. Then Mason walked to the screen. "Your monitoring network has scheduled maintenance windows," he said quietly. "During those windows, backup power cycles through the relay stations. For 20 to 30 minutes, refrigeration alerts don't transmit to your central hub. If someone knew those schedules, they could route vulnerable shipments through the blind spots deliberately." Victor leaned forward. "You're suggesting sabotage." "I'm suggesting that 4 identical failures in 4 months, all occurring during predictable maintenance cycles, is statistically impossible as coincidence." Kim was already pulling up her laptop. "He's right. I sent Charlotte the pattern this morning. Every failure aligns with maintenance windows." Daniel's face had gone carefully neutral. "That doesn't prove sabotage. It could be a design flaw we haven't caught." "It's not a flaw," Mason said. "I built these systems. The maintenance cycles are intentional. They're necessary for network stability, but they're also documented in the technical specifications. Anyone with access to those specs and the routing system could exploit the gap." Charlotte watched Daniel's reaction carefully, saw the slight tension in his jaw, the way his fingers stopped moving on his laptop. "Who has that access?" Victor asked. "In a company this size?" Mason moved to the screen, started navigating through the monitoring interface like he'd built it yesterday, which, Charlotte realized, he essentially had. Maybe 4 people. Whoever manages your routing algorithms, whoever handles maintenance scheduling, and whoever has administrative access to both systems. He pulled up a log file Charlotte had never seen before. Lines of code and timestamps filled the screen. "This is the hidden backup I mentioned," Mason said. "It records every change made to the routing system, even if those changes are deleted from the primary database. If someone's been manipulating shipments, it'll show here." He scrolled through entries, dates, times, user IDs. Then he stopped. There, he said quietly, pointing at the screen. Charlotte leaned closer. A series of routing changes, all made between midnight and 2 a.m. over the past 4 months. Each change had moved a high-value refrigerated shipment to Route 47, scheduled to pass through mile marker 183 during the exact maintenance windows Mason had described. Every single change was logged under the same user ID. DDM_admin_01. Daniel Mercer's administrative account. The room went completely silent. Charlotte looked at her CFO. Daniel was staring at the screen, face pale, and she saw it. The split second of recognition before he caught himself. "That's impossible," Daniel said. His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. "Anyone could have accessed my account. This doesn't prove—" "The timestamps match your building access logs," Mason said quietly. He'd pulled up another screen. "Every routing change was made from your office terminal during hours when building security shows you were the only person on this floor. The changes were made using your password, your biometric clearance, and your physical security key." Victor Hale sat back in his chair, watching Daniel with the expression of a man who'd just watched an investment implode. Charlotte felt something cold and sharp settling in her chest. Daniel Mercer had been with her for 3 years. She'd trusted him with everything: finances, operations, strategic planning. She'd promoted him twice, given him equity, included him in decisions that shaped the entire company. "Daniel," she said quietly, "tell me this is wrong." Her CFO looked at her. For a moment, she thought he might try to explain, to defend himself. Instead, he just closed his laptop. "I want my lawyer," he said. The meeting exploded into chaos. Victor's lawyers started making calls. Kim looked stunned. The other executives were talking over each other, demanding explanations. Charlotte just sat there, watching Daniel's expressionless face, trying to understand how she'd missed this. Mason stepped back from the screen, moved quietly toward the door. "Mr. Reed?" Victor called out. "Don't leave yet." Mason stopped. Victor stood, walked over to him, studied him with sharp eyes that had evaluated 1,000 business deals. "You found this in what, 30 minutes?" Victor asked. "Less? And you used to build these systems?" "Yes, sir." "Why aren't you still doing it?" Mason met his gaze directly. "Because I have a daughter who needs me home by dinner." Victor smiled slightly, the first genuine expression Charlotte had seen from him all morning. "A man with priorities. I respect that." He glanced at Charlotte. "Miss Bennett, I came here today prepared to pull my investment. Your operational failures suggested either incompetence or chaos. But what I just witnessed suggests you have the capacity to identify problems and fix them quickly. That's worth something." Charlotte found her voice. "You're still interested?" "On 2 conditions." Victor held up a finger. "1, you clean house. I want every executive, every manager, everyone who touches your supply chain investigated and vetted. If there's more rot, I want it gone." Second finger. 2, you hire this man properly, not as a consultant, as your head of infrastructure, because clearly he understands your systems better than anyone you currently employ. He looked at Mason. "What do you say, Mr. Reed? Care to save a company?" Mason was quiet for a long moment. Charlotte could see him thinking, weighing something she didn't understand. "I can't work traditional hours," he said finally. "I leave at 3:30 every day, no exceptions." "Then leave at 3:30. Victor shrugged. "Some of my best engineers have kept stranger schedules. What matters is whether you can do the job." "I can do the job. Then we have a deal." Victor turned back to Charlotte. "Fix this mess, Ms. Bennett. You have 90 days to prove your company deserves my money. I'll be watching." He walked out, lawyers trailing behind him. The conference room emptied slowly. Daniel was escorted out by security, still silent. The other executives drifted away, shell-shocked. Kim lingered near the door. "Charlotte," she said quietly, "I'm sorry I didn't catch this sooner. You caught enough." Charlotte managed a tired smile. "Go home. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start rebuilding." When Kim left, only Charlotte and Mason remained. She looked at him. The stranger who'd walked into her life 3 hours ago and torn apart everything she thought she knew about her own company. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Why did you walk away?" From engineering, from Hartwell, from all of it. You were at the top of your field. Mason was quiet for a moment. Through the glass walls, she could see the city spreading out below them, morning sun breaking through the clouds. My wife left when Sophie was 2, he said finally. Decided she didn't want to be a mother anymore. Just walked away. I had a choice. Keep working 80-hour weeks and let someone else raise my daughter, or step back and be the parent she deserved. It wasn't complicated math. That must have been hard. It was the easiest decision I ever made. He checked his watch. It's 11:47. If we're really doing this, if I'm really taking this job, I need to understand what else might be broken. But I meant what I said about 3:30. Charlotte stood, moved to the window, looked out at her city, her company, the empire she'd built with ruthless efficiency and absolute focus, and wondered when she'd stopped seeing the people who made it all work. "Tell me something, Mason," she said without turning around. "When you were listening to my phone calls this morning, what did you think of me?" Silence behind her. Then his quiet voice. "I thought you were someone who cares deeply about her work, and someone who hasn't learned yet that caring about work isn't the same as caring about people." She turned to face him. "That's pretty harsh." "You asked." "I did." Charlotte managed a small smile. "All right, Mr. Reed, you have until 3:30 to teach me everything I don't know about my own company. Let's get started." They worked through lunch. Mason pulled up system after system, explaining vulnerabilities Charlotte's team had never mentioned, security gaps nobody had documented, efficiency losses hidden in routine operations. He spoke quietly, precisely, never wasting words. By 2:30, Charlotte had filled 3 notebooks with problems she hadn't known existed. By 3:15, she understood why Victor Hale had been willing to bet $38 million on a company that could find and fix its own failures this quickly. At 3:27, Mason started shutting down his laptop. "I have to go," he said. "I know." Charlotte stood. "Same time tomorrow?" "Yes, ma'am." He headed toward the door, then paused. "Ms. Bennett," he said, "what you're doing, rebuilding everything, investigating everyone, it's going to be hard. People are going to resist. Some of your best employees might leave rather than submit to scrutiny." "I know. But it's the right thing to do." He met her eyes. "A company is just people. If you can't trust the people, nothing else matters." Then he was gone, leaving Charlotte alone in the conference room with her notebooks full of problems and the strangest feeling that her carefully controlled life had just tilted sideways in ways she didn't quite understand yet. Outside, through the window, she could see him walking toward his old sedan, going to pick up his daughter, right on time. Sophie Reed was 6 years old, had her father's gray eyes, and carried a stuffed rabbit named Oliver everywhere she went. Mason found her waiting outside Riverside Elementary at exactly 3:33 p.m., sitting on the bench by the front gate with her backpack at her feet and Oliver tucked under one arm. "You're late," she said when he pulled up. 3 minutes. Mason got out, opened the back door for her. Traffic. "Mrs. Henderson says 3 minutes is still late." Sophie climbed into her booster seat, clutching Oliver. "She says being on time shows respect." "Mrs. Henderson is right." Mason buckled her in, checked the straps twice. "I'm sorry." "It's okay, Daddy." Sophie's serious expression broke into a smile. "I told Oliver you were probably saving someone again." Mason froze for just a second, then kissed the top of her head. "Just helping with work stuff, baby. Nothing exciting." The drive home took 20 minutes through afternoon traffic. Sophie talked about her day, reading groups and playground drama, and how Tommy Martinez said girls couldn't play soccer, but she proved him wrong at recess. Mason listened the way he always did, asking questions, making her laugh, storing away every detail because these moments mattered more than anything that had happened in that glass conference room. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. Small living room, smaller kitchen, 2 bedrooms barely big enough for beds and dressers. The paint was old and the heating was inconsistent, and sometimes the neighbors upstairs fought loud enough to wake Sophie up at night. But the rent was manageable and the landlord didn't ask questions, and it was theirs. Mason made grilled cheese sandwiches while Sophie did homework at the kitchen table. She worked carefully, forming letters with the concentration of someone who took everything seriously. When she finished, she held up the worksheet for his inspection. "Perfect," Mason said, because it was. Can we watch the space show tonight? Sophie asked. After dinner. Deal? Deal. They ate on the couch, paper plates balanced on their knees, watching a documentary about Mars rovers that Sophie had seen 4 times already, but never got tired of. When her eyes started getting heavy around 8, Mason carried her to bed, tucked Oliver in beside her, and read 3 chapters from the book about the girl who lived in a museum. Daddy? Sophie's voice was sleepy. Are you happy? The question caught him off guard. What do you mean, baby? At your job? Are you happy driving people around? Mason thought about the question, about the conference room and the monitoring systems and Charlotte Bennett's expression when she realized her CFO had been stealing from her, about the offer Victor Hale had made, head of infrastructure, real money, the kind of work he used to love. I'm happy being your dad, he said finally. That's what matters. But you could do other things too. Sophie yawned. Mrs. Henderson says grown-ups can have jobs and be happy. You don't have to pick just one. Mrs. Henderson is very smart. I know. Sophie's eyes were closing. Love you, Daddy. Love you too, sweetheart. He sat there in the dark for a while after she fell asleep, listening to her breathe, thinking about choices and sacrifices and whether he'd made the right ones. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Charlotte Bennett. Lisa got your contact info from the driver app. I need you here at 8 a.m. tomorrow. We're starting the internal audit. Your rate is $200 per hour, non-negotiable. See you in the morning. Mason stared at the message. $200 an hour was more than he'd made in a month driving. If he worked even half days until 3:30, that was $1,400 a week. $5,600 a month. Money for Sophie's college fund. Money to move somewhere better. Money to stop working 3 different gig jobs just to cover rent and groceries. He typed back, I'll be there. The next morning, Mason dropped Sophie at school and drove straight to Meridian Tower. Lisa met him in the lobby with a temporary security badge and a tablet. Ms. Bennett is already in her office, Lisa said, walking him toward the elevators. Fair warning, she's been here since 6 and she's had about 40 cups of coffee. The woman runs on pure anxiety and spite. Good to know. Also, Daniel Mercer's lawyer served us with papers this morning. He's claiming wrongful termination and defamation. Says we falsely accused him of fraud with insufficient evidence. The elevator doors opened. Mason stepped inside. The evidence was pretty clear. Yeah, well, his lawyer disagrees. Lisa handed him the tablet. Everything you need is on here. System access, employee files, financial records. Ms. Bennett wants you to go through the entire infrastructure team with a microscope. Charlotte's office was on the top floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, modern furniture that probably cost more than Mason's car. She was standing at her desk, talking on the phone, and gestured him in without breaking conversation. I don't care what the insurance company says, Victor, she was saying. We lost $400,000 in product due to deliberate sabotage. That's not operational failure, that's criminal activity, and they need to process the claim. Pause. Yes, I understand their position. Tell them to understand mine. She ended the call, looked at Mason. You're early. You said 8. Most people interpret that as 8:15. Charlotte grabbed a coffee mug from her desk. I like early. Coffee? I'm good. Suit yourself. She moved to the window, stared out at the city. Daniel's lawyer is trying to bury us in motions. My board is panicking. 3 executives have already asked for emergency meetings to discuss leadership stability. And Victor Hale called at midnight to remind me I have 89 days left to prove this company isn't imploding. Sounds stressful. It's fantastic. She turned and Mason saw something fierce in her expression. For 3 years I trusted the wrong person. He stole from me, sabotaged my company, and I missed it completely. So now I get to tear apart everything and rebuild it right. You know what that feels like? Like having control again. Exactly. Charlotte set down her coffee. I need you to audit every single person who touches our logistics systems. I want to know who has access, who knows the vulnerabilities, who might be working with Daniel. Can you do that? Yes? How long? Mason thought about it. Depends how deep you want me to go. Surface level, maybe a week. Complete forensic analysis, 3 weeks minimum. You have 10 days. Charlotte pulled up a spreadsheet on her computer. These are the names I'm most concerned about. Start there. Mason looked at the list. 15 people, ranging from senior engineers to operations managers. He recognized some of the names from yesterday's files. Some of these people have been with you for years, he said. I know. Investigating them is going to create resentment. People don't like being treated as suspects. I don't care. Charlotte's voice was flat. Daniel proved I can't trust my own judgment, so I'm trusting data instead. Find me proof they're clean or find me proof they're dirty. Either way, I want to know. Mason spent the next 6 hours buried in system logs, access records, and financial data. Charlotte had given him a small office down the hall, windowless, barely big enough for a desk and chair, and he'd converted it into a command center. 3 monitors running different analysis programs, printouts covering every surface, coffee cups accumulating like evidence of time passing. Kim Torres stopped by around noon. You eat lunch? She asked from the doorway. Mason looked up, realized he'd completely lost track of time. What time is it? 12:30. Come on, I'll buy you a sandwich. The building had a cafeteria on the second floor, all glass and natural light and food that was trying very hard to be healthy. Kim ordered them both chicken wraps and found a table by the window. So you're the guy who destroyed Daniel in one morning, she said, unwrapping her food. That's quite an introduction. I just showed the data. Yeah, well, the data made him look like a criminal, which apparently he was. Kim took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. Charlotte told me you built the original monitoring systems. That true? Most of them. Why'd you leave Hartwell? Personal reasons. Kim studied him for a moment. You're not big on details, are you? Not usually. Fair enough. She pulled out her phone, showed him a photo. 2 kids, maybe 8 and 10, grinning at the camera with ice cream on their faces. That's why I work here. Single mom, 2 elementary schoolers, college funds that aren't going to fill themselves. Everyone's got their reasons. Mason understood what she was really asking. I'm not here to make people's lives harder. I'm just trying to make sure the systems are secure. Good, because some people on your list are my friends. They're good at their jobs and they've never done anything wrong except work for a company that hired one bad executive. Then the data will show that. And if it doesn't, then Charlotte deserves to know. Kim finished her wrap in silence. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. Daniel fooled all of us. I worked with him for 2 years, trusted him completely. Finding out he was stealing, it makes you question everything, you know? Like if I missed that, what else am I missing? That's not your fault. Feels like it should be. She stood, gathered her trash. Look, I know Charlotte's in full scorched earth mode right now. Just remember these are real people with families and mortgages. Not everyone's a criminal. I know. After she left, Mason sat there thinking about trust and betrayal and the weight of discovering you'd been wrong about someone important. He understood Charlotte's anger better than she probably realized. When his wife had left, he'd spent months replaying every conversation, every moment, trying to find the signs he'd missed. The warnings that should have told him she was already gone before she actually walked out. He never found them. Sometimes people just hid things well. His phone buzzed. Sophie's school. Mr. Reed, this is Principal Morrison. Sophie's fine, but there was an incident at lunch and I need you to come in. Mason's heart jumped. What kind of incident? She got into a physical altercation with another student. Nobody's hurt, but school policy requires a parent meeting. He checked his watch. 1:47 p.m. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Charlotte was on a conference call when Mason knocked on her office door. She looked up, saw his expression, muted the call. Emergency? She asked. My daughter's school. I have to go. Is she okay? They said she's fine. There was a fight. Charlotte's eyebrows went up. Your daughter fights? Apparently today she does. Mason grabbed his jacket. I'll make up the hours tomorrow. Don't worry about the hours. Go. Riverside Elementary's principal office smelled like old books and anxiety. Sophie was sitting in a chair outside Morrison's door, backpack at her feet, Oliver clutched tight. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying anymore. Hey, baby. Mason crouched down in front of her. You okay? Sophie nodded. Didn't say anything. Principal Morrison appeared in the doorway, 50-something, gray hair, the expression of someone who'd seen every possible version of kid drama. Mr. Reed, come in, please. Sophie, you stay here. Morrison's office was small and cluttered, walls covered with photos of students and motivational posters. Mason sat in the chair across from her desk, feeling like he was the one in trouble. Sophie hit another student, Morrison said without preamble. Tommy Martinez punched him in the stomach during lunch. Mason felt his stomach drop. Sophie punched someone? According to witnesses, Tommy was teasing another girl, Emma Chen, about her accent. Sophie told him to stop. He didn't. She hit him. Is he hurt? Bruised ego mostly. His parents are upset, understandably. Morrison leaned back in her chair. Mr. Reed, Sophie is normally one of our best students. Quiet, well-behaved, kind to other kids. This is completely out of character. I know. Is everything okay at home? Any changes, stresses, things that might explain this behavior? Mason thought about yesterday morning, the car ride with Charlotte, the boardroom confrontation, coming home late because he'd spent 6 hours explaining fraud patterns, Sophie asking if he was happy. I started a new job, he said. Different hours, more demanding. Maybe that's affecting her. Maybe. Morrison's expression softened slightly. Look, I'm not trying to make this a big deal. Sophie defended another kid who was being bullied. Her heart was in the right place. But hitting isn't acceptable, even for good reasons. We need to make sure she understands that. She will. Good. She's suspended for the rest of today and tomorrow. School policy. When she comes back Friday, we'll consider this resolved. Morrison stood. She's a good kid, Mr. Reed. I'm sure this was just a one-time thing. Mason found Sophie still sitting in the hallway, looking small and miserable. Come on, he said quietly. Let's go home. They didn't talk in the car. Mason kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, trying to figure out what to say. Sophie stared out the window, holding Oliver, not crying, but not okay either. At home, Mason made hot chocolate, set the mug in front of Sophie at the kitchen table, and sat down across from her. You want to tell me what happened? He asked. Sophie's voice came out very small. Tommy was being mean to Emma. What was he saying? He said she talked funny because she's from China. He kept making fake Chinese sounds and laughing. Emma was crying. Mason felt anger flash hot in his chest. That's not okay. I know. I told him to stop, but he didn't stop. He just laughed more. Sophie looked up at him, eyes wet. So I hit him. Baby, you can't hit people, even when they're being mean. But you stopped bad people yesterday. Her voice cracked. You told me you helped catch someone who was stealing. That's like hitting, isn't it? Stopping bad things? Mason realized she'd been listening more carefully than he'd thought. It's different. How? Because I used information and evidence to prove someone did something wrong. I didn't hurt anyone. But what if the bad guy didn't stop? What if he kept stealing even after you showed everyone the evidence? Sophie wiped her eyes. Sometimes talking doesn't work, Daddy. Sometimes you have to make people stop. She wasn't wrong, but she was 6, and the world couldn't work that way for her yet. Come here, Mason said. Sophie climbed into his lap, buried her face against his chest. He held her, feeling her shake with quiet sobs, and tried to figure out how to explain that standing up for people was right, but violence was wrong, that some rules had exceptions, but not when you're in first grade. I'm proud of you for defending Emma, he said finally. That took courage, but hitting Tommy didn't teach him anything except that you're stronger than he is. You know what would have worked better? What? Telling a teacher, getting an adult involved who could actually make him stop and make sure he faces real consequences. But that's tattling. No, baby. Tattling is getting someone in trouble for no reason. Telling is getting help when someone's being hurt. There's a difference. Sophie was quiet for a long time, then, Am I in big trouble? You're suspended for 2 days. When you go back to school Friday, you're going to apologize to Tommy. But he was mean. I know. And he should apologize to Emma, but you still hit him, and that means you still need to say sorry for the hitting part. Mason tilted her chin up so she was looking at him. You can be right about why you did something and still wrong about how you did it. Understand? Sophie nodded slowly. Okay. Good. Now go wash your face. We're going to spend the rest of the afternoon doing something fun because you're suspended and I'm playing hooky from work. Really? Really. They went to the park. Sophie played on the swings while Mason pushed her higher and higher, her laughter cutting through the autumn air. Later, they got ice cream from the truck by the soccer fields, And Sophie told him everything about Emma Chen, how she was new this year, how her family had just moved from California, how she always shared her crackers at snack time. I think you should invite her over for a play date, Mason said. Sophie's face lit up. Really? Really, maybe this weekend. By the time they got home, Sophie was tired and happy, the suspension temporarily forgotten. Mason made spaghetti for dinner, and they ate while watching her space documentary again. When he tucked her in that night, she was already half asleep. "Daddy?" she mumbled. "I'm still sorry I hit Tommy." "I know, baby. You're a good kid who made a mistake. That's okay. Love you. Love you too." Mason's phone rang at 9:15 p.m. "Charlotte." "Did you know your daughter can throw a punch?" she asked. Mason sat down on the couch, exhausted. "How did you—" "Lisa has kids at Riverside. Parent network gossip moves faster than our data systems." Charlotte's tone was amused. Apparently Sophie Reed is a first-grade vigilante. She defended a kid who was being bullied. "I heard. I also heard you spent the afternoon at the park instead of finishing the audit." "Yeah, I'll make it up." "Stop." Charlotte's voice was firm. "I told you to go. Family first. I meant it." Mason didn't know what to say to that. "Listen," Charlotte continued, "I need to tell you something. Daniel's lawyer subpoenaed our security footage from Tuesday. They're trying to prove we brought in an unauthorized consultant to manufacture evidence against their client." "That's insane." "That's expensive legal defense strategy. They're going to argue you had access to the systems. You could have planted the routing changes yourself, and we're using you as a scapegoat to cover our own operational failures." Mason felt cold settle in his stomach. Can they make that stick? Not if our lawyers are worth what we pay them. But it means you're going to be deposed. They'll ask about your background, your employment history, why you left Hartwell, everything. She paused. "I need to know if there's anything in your past that could hurt us." "Like what?" "Like any reason someone could claim you're not credible. Lawsuits, bankruptcies, criminal record, professional disputes, anything." Mason thought about the divorce papers that had labeled him an absent father because he worked too much. Thought about the custody hearing where his ex-wife's lawyer had painted him as emotionally unavailable and career-obsessed. Thought about walking away from Hartwell before they could fire him for refusing to travel after Sophie was born. "Nothing criminal," he said finally. "My divorce was messy. My ex claimed I prioritized work over family, then left because I stopped prioritizing work. There's irony in there somewhere." "Any chance she'd testify against you?" "No idea. We haven't spoken in 4 years." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "Okay. I'll have our lawyers prepare for that possibility. In the meantime, keep doing what you're doing. The audit is more important than Daniel's legal theater." "Charlotte?" "Yeah? Why are you trusting me with this? You don't actually know me. For all you know, Daniel's lawyer is right, and I'm just some guy who manipulated his way into your company." She laughed, short and sharp. "You want to know the truth? I don't trust easily. Never have. I evaluate people based on what they do, not what they say. And what you did was find a massive fraud in 30 minutes, help me expose it, then leave at 3:30 to pick up your kid. That tells me everything I need to know about your priorities." She paused. "Plus, Sophie punched a bully for the right reasons. I respect that." After she hung up, Mason sat in the dark living room, thinking about trust and credibility and how quickly everything could fall apart. He'd spent 5 years building a quiet, safe life for Sophie, working jobs that didn't matter, staying invisible, making sure nobody looked too closely at the brilliant engineer who'd walked away from everything. Now, Charlotte Bennett had pulled him back into the world he'd left behind, and he wasn't sure if that was salvation or disaster. His phone buzzed again, a text from Kim Torres. "Hey, heard about Sophie. If you need someone to watch her tomorrow while she's suspended, my mom does daycare. She's great with kids. Let me know." Mason stared at the message, surprised, then typed back, "Thank you. I appreciate it." 3 dots appeared, then, "We take care of our own here, even the new guys." He fell asleep on his couch that night, laptop open with security logs still running analysis, and dreamed about systems with hidden flaws that nobody noticed until everything collapsed. The next morning, Mason dropped Sophie at Kim's mother's house, a warm, cluttered home that smelled like cookies and had toys everywhere. Sophie went in nervous and came back out smiling when he picked her up at 3 o'clock. "Mrs. Torres is nice," she reported in the car. "She taught me how to make origami cranes. Look." She held up a slightly crooked paper bird. "That's beautiful, baby. Can I go back tomorrow?" "You're not suspended tomorrow. You'll be at school." "Oh, right." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "Daddy, are you going to keep the new job?" "I think so. Why?" "Because you seem different, like happier, but also more tired." Mason glanced at her in the mirror, 6 years old and already reading him like a book. "The work is interesting," he said carefully. "It's stuff I used to do before you were born, stuff I'm good at." "Then you should keep doing it." Sophie nodded seriously. "Mrs. Henderson says people should do things they're good at. It makes the world better." Mrs. Henderson is very wise. That afternoon, Mason finished the first phase of the audit. Out of 15 people on Charlotte's list, 12 came back completely clean. 3 had minor security violations, accessing systems outside their clearance level, mostly curiosity rather than malice. Nothing prosecutable. But there was one name that bothered him: Ryan Torres, Kim's younger brother. Junior Systems Administrator, hired 8 months ago. His access logs showed something strange: late-night logins that coincided with some of the routing changes, then immediate logouts, like someone had borrowed his credentials. Mason called Charlotte. "I found something," he said, "but you're not going to like it." She came down to his office 20 minutes later, closed the door behind her. "Show me." Mason pulled up the access logs. Ryan Torres has been accessing the routing system between midnight and 3 a.m. at least once a week for the past 6 months. But here's the thing: building security shows his badge never entered the facility during those times. Charlotte leaned closer, studying the screen. "Someone's using his credentials. That's my guess. Either he gave them to someone or someone stole them. Who has access to steal credentials? In a company this size, IT administrators, security team, maybe a dozen people total." Mason switched screens. "But look at this. Every time Ryan's credentials were used remotely, there's a corresponding login from Daniel's office terminal within the same hour." Charlotte went very still. Daniel was using Ryan's access to cover his tracks. Looks that way. He'd make the routing changes under Ryan's credentials, then log in as himself for normal work to establish an alibi. So Ryan's innocent. Probably, but we need to interview him to be sure. Charlotte pulled out her phone, called Kim. "I need to talk to your brother, today. Can you get him to my office in an hour?" Pause. "No, he's not in trouble. Just need to verify some information." Another pause. "Thanks." She ended the call, looked at Mason. "This is the part I hate. Telling someone their family member might be compromised. He's probably just a victim." Probably, but Kim doesn't know that yet. Ryan Torres was 23, nervous, and clearly terrified when he showed up at Charlotte's office. Kim came with him, protective and worried. "Mr. Torres," Charlotte said gently, "you're not in trouble. We just need to ask some questions about your system access." Ryan's eyes darted to Mason, then back to Charlotte. "What kind of questions?" Mason pulled up the logs. "Your credentials were used to access the routing system remotely at least 20 times in the past 6 months, always late at night. Do you remember making those logins?" "No." Ryan's face went pale. "I mean, I work late sometimes, but from home, and I wouldn't access routing. That's not my department." "Did you ever share your password with anyone?" "No, never. That's against policy." "Did you ever leave your credentials written down anywhere, maybe in your desk or on your computer?" Ryan thought about it. There's a password manager on my work laptop. I left the laptop in the office a few times when I went home sick, but it's password protected." Mason and Charlotte exchanged glances. "When you left it," Mason asked carefully, "where did you leave it?" "Usually locked in my desk drawer, sometimes just on my desk if I was planning to come back the next morning." Kim made a soft sound. "Ryan, please tell me you didn't—" "I didn't think anyone would touch it." Ryan looked miserable. "It's the office. We're all supposed to trust each other." Charlotte's expression softened. "Mr. Torres, I don't think you did anything wrong. I think someone exploited your trust. That's not your fault. But if my credentials were used for something illegal, then we'll prove you weren't the one using them." Charlotte looked at Mason. Can we do that? Already did. Mason pulled up another screen. Every remote login under Ryan's credentials came from an IP address registered to Daniel Mercer's home internet. Ryan's home IP is different. Plus, the keystroke patterns don't match. Daniel typed faster, made different common errors. Digital fingerprints. Ryan looked like he might cry from relief. So I'm not going to get fired? No, Charlotte said firmly. But we are going to reset all your credentials and implement two-factor authentication across the entire company. This shouldn't have been possible. After Ryan and Kim left, Charlotte sank into her chair, exhausted. How many other Ryans are there? She asked. How many people trusted the wrong person because I created a culture where we were all supposed to trust each other blindly? Trust isn't bad, Mason said, but verification is better. That's depressing. That's realistic. Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. You know what I realized today? I spent 3 years building this company, and I don't actually know most of the people who work here. I know their performance metrics and their quarterly reviews, but I don't know if they have kids or what makes them happy or whether they feel safe coming to work every day. You can't know everyone in a company this size. Maybe not, but I should know the people I'm asking to trust me. She stood, moved to the window. Tomorrow, I'm starting mandatory one-on-ones with every executive and department head. Not about work, about them. Who they are, what they need, whether they feel supported. That's going to take a lot of time. Then I'll make time. Charlotte turned back to him. You do this naturally, don't you? See people as people, not resources. I have a 6-year-old who punches bullies. I don't have a choice. Charlotte smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her in 2 days. How is Sophie? Suspended and learning origami. Sounds like she's handling it better than most adults handle consequences. Mason checked his watch. 3:18 p.m. I need to go. I know. Same time tomorrow? Yeah. He grabbed his jacket, then paused at the door. Charlotte, what you said about knowing your people, that's good leadership. Don't let Daniel's betrayal make you think caring is weakness. Is that what you tell Sophie when she gets hurt? Something like that. He left her standing at the window, looking out at her empire, and wondered if she understood yet that companies weren't built with money and strategy. They were built with trust that had to be earned every single day, one person at a time. The deposition happened on a Wednesday morning in a conference room that smelled like expensive leather, and the kind of tension that comes before something breaks. Daniel Mercer's lawyer was a woman named Patricia Vance, 50-something with steel gray hair and the expression of someone who ate witnesses for breakfast. Mason sat across the table from her with Charlotte's attorney beside him, a younger guy named Marcus Webb, who'd spent the previous hour explaining that the best strategy was to answer questions simply and not volunteer extra information. Just tell the truth, Marcus had said. Don't try to outsmart her. Now, Patricia was arranging papers in front of her with the deliberate slowness of someone establishing dominance. The court reporter sat ready at the end of the table. Daniel himself was absent, his right to avoid watching his former company dismantle his defense. Mr. Reed, Patricia began, voice smooth as glass. Let's start with your credentials. You claim to have designed the monitoring systems that Bennett Meridian Logistics currently uses. Is that correct? I helped design them, yes. Helped, not designed. I was lead systems engineer on the project. I had a team of 8 people working under me. At Hartwell Global. Yes. A company that no longer exists. It was acquired and dissolved in 2019. Patricia made a note. And when did you leave Hartwell? August 2020. Why did you leave? Marcus started to object, but Mason touched his arm. Personal reasons. My daughter needed me home. Your daughter. Patricia smiled slightly. Sophie Reed, age 6, living with you full-time while her mother has no custody rights. Is that correct? Mason felt his jaw tighten. Her mother chose not to be involved. Chose or was legally prevented? Chose. The custody arrangement was settled by mutual agreement. But there was a custody dispute initially. Yes. During which your ex-wife's attorney argued you were an absent father who prioritized career advancement over family responsibilities. Isn't that true? Charlotte's hand moved slightly on the table beside him. Mason kept his voice level. That was her attorney's argument. The judge disagreed. The judge awarded you full custody after you quit your high-paying job and started driving for gig services. Patricia leaned forward. That's quite a career change, Mr. Reed, from lead systems engineer making six figures to driver making what? Minimum wage? I make enough to support my daughter. Do you? Patricia pulled out a document. According to your tax returns from last year, you earned $32,000. Is that correct? Yes. That's barely above the poverty line for a household of two. Marcus cut in. Relevance, counselor? I'm establishing Mr. Reed's financial situation at the time he was hired by Bennett Meridian. A man struggling to make ends meet suddenly offered $200 an hour to audit his former systems. That's quite an incentive to find problems where none exist. I found problems that were already there, Mason said quietly. Or created them. Patricia's voice was sharp now. You had complete access to Bennett Meridian's systems. You understood the architecture better than anyone currently employed there. How do we know you didn't plant the evidence against my client? Because the timestamps predate my involvement by months. Timestamps that you claim to have found in a hidden backup system that nobody else knew existed. A system you supposedly designed years ago. She pulled out another document. Convenient that the only person who could access this evidence is the same person who benefits financially from its discovery. Mason looked at Marcus, who nodded slightly. Let her finish. Mr. Reed, did you have any contact with my client prior to November 12th? No. Never met him? Never spoke with him? I drove Ms. Bennett to a meeting where he was present. That was our only interaction. And yet within hours of that first meeting, you were accusing him of systematic fraud. Patricia tapped her pen against her notepad. That's remarkably fast detective work. I recognized a pattern in the data. A pattern that a team of experienced auditors had missed for months. Yes, because you're just that brilliant. Mason met her eyes directly. Because I built the systems, and I know where people hide things when they don't want to be found. Patricia sat back, smiled coldly. Let's talk about your departure from Hartwell Global. You claim it was voluntary. It was. Yet according to internal communications we've obtained, you were placed on performance review in July 2020, 1 month before your resignation. Your supervisor noted that you were frequently absent, missed important meetings, and showed decreased engagement with project responsibilities. My daughter was 2 years old and her mother had just left. I was adjusting. Or you were failing to meet professional standards and left before you could be terminated. I left because I chose my daughter over my career. That's not failure. It is if you're bitter about that choice. Patricia leaned forward again. Tell me, Mr. Reed, do you resent the people who stayed in the industry? The ones who kept climbing while you were driving strangers to the airport? Mason felt anger flash hot, but kept his voice calm. No. Not even a little? Not when you see someone like Charlotte Bennett running a multi-million-dollar logistics company using systems you designed while you're living in a third-floor walk-up and working multiple jobs just to pay rent? Ms. Vance, Marcus said sharply, this is harassment. It's establishing motive. Patricia didn't look away from Mason. You had the knowledge, the access, and the financial incentive to manufacture evidence against my client. And you had the resentment to want to hurt the people who succeeded where you didn't. That's not what happened. Then what did happen? You expect us to believe you just happened to be driving Ms. Bennett that morning? That you just happened to overhear information about system failures? That you just happened to identify fraud that had gone undetected for months? She paused. That's a lot of coincidence, Mr. Reed. Sometimes coincidences happen. Or sometimes struggling single fathers accept questionable consulting work because they need the money and don't ask too many questions about the evidence they're being paid to find. Charlotte's voice cut across the room, cold and clear. That's enough. Patricia turned to her. Ms. Bennett, your attorney can advise you not to speak. I don't need advice to call out garbage when I hear it. Charlotte stood, placed both hands flat on the table. Mr. Reed found systematic fraud because it existed, because your client was stealing from my company, and the reason nobody else caught it is because Daniel Mercer was CFO and had the authority to bury evidence before auditors could see it. That's an unsubstantiated accusation. It's documented fact. We have the routing changes. We have the maintenance schedules. We have Ryan Torres's stolen credentials and the IP addresses proving they were used from Daniel's home network. Charlotte's voice was getting harder. Your client committed fraud. Mason Reed exposed it. Everything else you're throwing at him is just noise designed to distract from the fact that you have no defense. Patricia smiled. Ms. Bennett, emotional outbursts don't strengthen your case. Neither does character assassination. Charlotte looked at Mason. We're done here. The deposition isn't finished. Yes, it is. Charlotte gathered her things. You want more testimony, you can subpoena us properly instead of fishing for personal attacks. Marcus, file a motion to quash this deposition on grounds of harassment. We're leaving. Outside in the hallway, Charlotte was still shaking with anger. Mason had never seen her like this. Her professional composure completely stripped away, replaced with something raw and furious. She had no right, Charlotte said, pacing. No right to bring up Sophie, your finances, any of it. It's her job, Mason said quietly. She's defending her client. By attacking you personally, that's not defense, that's bullying. Charlotte stopped pacing, looked at him. I'm sorry. I should have prepared you better for this. You told me it would be hard. I didn't tell you they'd try to make you look like a desperate con artist. Marcus caught up to them, phone already out. I'm filing the motion today. Judge Morrison doesn't tolerate witness harassment. We'll get this deposition thrown out. Good. Charlotte's jaw was tight. And Marcus? I want Daniel's legal team investigated. Patricia Vance somehow obtained Hartwell Global internal communications from 4 years ago. That's not public record. Someone gave her privileged information. I'll look into it. Charlotte turned back to Mason. Take the rest of the day off. You shouldn't have to work after that. I'm fine. You're not fine. Nobody's fine after being attacked like that. She softened slightly. Go pick up Sophie early. Spend the afternoon doing something that reminds you why you made the choices you made. Mason wanted to argue but recognized the look in her eyes. The same fierce protectiveness he felt whenever someone threatened Sophie. Charlotte was angry on his behalf, and fighting her about it would only make it worse. Okay, he said. I'll see you tomorrow. He picked Sophie up from school at 2:45, surprising her. She climbed into the car with her backpack and Oliver grinning. How come you're early? She asked. Thought we could do something fun. What do you want to do? Sophie's eyes lit up. Can we go to the Science Museum? They have the planetarium show about black holes. Perfect. The museum was nearly empty on a Wednesday afternoon. Sophie dragged him through exhibits about space and dinosaurs and the human body, asking 1,000 questions and absorbing every answer like she was storing them for future use. In the planetarium, she sat pressed against his side while stars wheeled overhead, and the narrator explained how gravity warped space-time. Daddy, Sophie whispered, if you fell into a black hole, would time stop? For you, no. For everyone watching you, yes. That's sad. You'd be alone forever and everyone else would think you disappeared. Mason thought about the past 5 years, how he'd felt sometimes like he'd fallen into a different timeline, where everyone else kept moving forward while he stayed frozen in place, raising his daughter while the world forgot he existed. Yeah, he said quietly. That would be sad. After the museum, they got pizza from Sophie's favorite place and ate it in the park while she told him about Emma Chen, who'd come over for a playdate on Saturday and turned out to like space documentaries just as much as Sophie did. She wants to be an astronaut, Sophie said seriously. I told her I want to be an engineer like you used to be. We're going to work at NASA together. That's a good plan. Will you help me with science homework when I'm older so I can learn the hard stuff? Absolutely. Sophie smiled, then got quiet. Daddy, are people being mean to you at work? The question caught him off guard. What makes you think that? You look sad sometimes when you come home, like how I looked after I hit Tommy. She picked at her pizza crust. Did you hit someone at work? No, baby, nothing like that. Then why are you sad? Mason pulled her close, kissed the top of her head. Sometimes grown-up work is complicated. People don't always agree about things, but it's nothing you need to worry about. Is it because of the bad man who was stealing? Kind of. Are they mad you caught him? His lawyer is trying to say I was wrong about it. Sophie frowned, processing this. But you weren't wrong. You showed everyone the proof. I did, but sometimes people don't want to believe the proof because it's easier to blame someone else. That's dumb. Yeah, Mason agreed. It kind of is. They stayed at the park until sunset, Sophie playing on the swings, while Mason pushed her and thought about Patricia Vance's questions. The resentment she'd asked about, whether he was bitter about people who'd succeeded while he'd stepped back, wasn't entirely unfair. There were nights when he lay awake wondering what his career would look like if he'd made different choices. Whether he'd be running his own company now, or leading some major infrastructure project, or teaching at a university. But then Sophie would wake up from a bad dream and call for him, and he'd go sit on her bed until she fell back asleep. And he'd remember that none of those hypothetical achievements mattered compared to being there when she needed him. Still, Patricia's words had hit something raw. The financial struggle was real. The third-floor walk-up was real. The anxiety about whether he could keep affording Sophie's school supplies and winter coat and all the little things that added up, that was all real. Taking Charlotte's job had felt like a lifeline. $200 an hour was enough to stop drowning, enough to start saving, enough to give Sophie a childhood that wasn't defined by constant scarcity. But now Patricia Vance had taken that relief and twisted it into evidence of corruption, made it look like Mason had manufactured a fraud case because he needed the money too badly, to be honest. His phone buzzed. A text from Charlotte. "Stop spiraling. I can feel you overthinking from here. You did nothing wrong." Mason smiled despite himself. Typed back. "How do you know I'm overthinking?" "Because I've been doing it for the past 3 hours. Lawyer PTSD is contagious. I'm fine." Liar. "Come by my office tomorrow morning before you start work. I want to show you something." "What?" "Surprise. Be there at 7:30. The next morning, Mason dropped Sophie at school and drove to Meridian Tower, wondering what Charlotte had planned. She met him in the lobby wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her usual suit, looking younger and less intimidating than he'd ever seen her. "Come on," she said. "We're not going to my office." "Then where?" "You'll see." She led him to the parking garage where a sleek black SUV was waiting. Charlotte got in the driver's seat. Mason hesitated, then climbed in beside her. "You know I'm a professional driver," he said. "You don't have to—" "Shut up and enjoy being a passenger for once." They drove north out of the city, morning traffic thinning as buildings gave way to suburbs and then to open highway. Charlotte had music playing, something acoustic and melancholy that didn't match her personality at all. After 20 minutes, she exited onto a smaller road that wound through industrial parks and warehouses. "Where are we going?" Mason asked. "You'll recognize it when we get there." 5 minutes later, they pulled up to a massive facility with faded signage that read, "Hartwell Global Logistics, Northern Distribution Center." The building looked abandoned, windows dark, parking lot empty except for a few pieces of rusted equipment. Mason stared at it. "This is, the facility where you installed the original monitoring systems." Charlotte turned off the car. "I did some research. This building's been empty since the Hartwell acquisition. The new owners stripped the equipment and left the shell." She looked at him. "I bought it yesterday." "You what?" "Bought it. The land, the building, everything. Got a good price because nobody wants a 40-year-old warehouse in the middle of nowhere." "Why would you buy this?" Charlotte opened her door. "Come inside and I'll show you." The interior was vast and echoing, sunlight streaming through high windows onto concrete floors marked with old forklift tracks and the ghosts of equipment that had been removed. Mason walked slowly through the space, remembering where control panels had been mounted, where the refrigeration units had lined the walls, where his team had spent 6 months installing the monitoring infrastructure that had won them that award. "This was my life," he said quietly. "For 6 years, I spent more time here than anywhere else." "I know." Charlotte stood beside him, looking around at the empty space. "I read the project reports. You designed something brilliant, Mason, a monitoring system that was 5 years ahead of its time. The whole industry copied it." And then I walked away. To be a father, that's not walking away. That's choosing something more important. She turned to face him. "Patricia Vance tried to make you look weak yesterday, like you failed at your career and are desperately trying to claw back relevance by sabotaging mine. That's garbage. You didn't fail. You succeeded at something harder than building systems." Mason didn't know what to say. "I brought you here," Charlotte continued, "because I want you to see what I'm planning. This facility is going to be Bennett Meridian's new northern hub. State-of-the-art cold chain storage, expanded distribution capacity, everything we need to triple our market share in this region." She paused. And I want you to design it. All of it. The monitoring systems, the security architecture, the operational flow, your vision, your standards built right this time from the ground up. Charlotte, this is a 3-year project worth $40 million. I'm offering you head of infrastructure, real title, real authority, real salary, 200,000 base plus equity. She met his eyes. And you still leave every day at 3:30 to pick up Sophie. Non-negotiable. Mason felt like the floor had shifted under him. That's insane. It's business. You're the best person for this job. I'm offering you what you're worth. I've been out of the industry for 5 years, and you still caught fraud my entire executive team missed. You still understand these systems better than anyone I could hire. Charlotte's voice was firm. I'm not offering you charity, Mason. I'm offering you a job that I genuinely need you to do. The question is whether you're ready to come back. Mason looked around the empty facility. Thought about Sophie asking if he was happy. Thought about Patricia Vance questioning whether he resented the people who'd succeeded. Thought about the choice he'd made 5 years ago and whether it had to be permanent. What about the legal case? He asked. Daniel's team is going to keep attacking my credibility. Let them. Marcus is filing motions to dismiss based on harassment. And honestly, the stronger Daniel's lawyers fight, the more obvious it is they have no real defense. Charlotte smiled slightly. He's going to lose, Mason. The evidence is too solid. This is just death throes. And if I say yes to this job, then you become the public face of our infrastructure division. You'll be doing interviews, presenting at industry conferences, rebuilding the reputation that Hartwell's collapse damaged. People will know your name again. Mason thought about anonymity, about the safety of being invisible, about 5 years of deliberately not standing out because standing out meant questions and scrutiny and the possibility that someone would judge his choices. But he also thought about Sophie at the Science Museum, talking about NASA and engineering and wanting her father to help with the hard stuff when she was older. About teaching her that walking away wasn't the same as giving up, that sometimes you could step back and then step forward again when the time was right. I need to think about it, he said. Take all the time you need. The offer stands. Charlotte checked her watch. Come on. I'll drive you back. You've got an audit to finish. On the drive back to the city, Mason's phone rang. Marcus Webb. Good news, the lawyer said. Judge Morrison threw out yesterday's deposition, called it a fishing expedition, and sanctioned Patricia Vance for witness harassment. You won't have to testify again unless they come back with specific relevant questions. That was fast. Morrison doesn't mess around. Also, we traced how Vance got those Hartwell communications. Daniel's legal team hired a private investigator who accessed archived personnel files through questionable means. We're filing a complaint with the Bar Association. After Marcus hung up, Charlotte glanced at him. See? Told you it would work out. You couldn't have known that for sure. No. But I knew you were telling the truth, and the truth usually wins eventually. She merged onto the highway. That's the difference between you and Daniel. He spent months building lies and hoping nobody would notice. You just showed up and told the truth, even when it was hard. Back at Meridian Tower, Mason threw himself into work. The audit was almost complete. 15 people cleared, 3 with minor violations, 0 evidence of ongoing fraud. He wrote up his findings in a detailed report that Charlotte could present to the board and to Victor Hale. Kim stopped by his office around noon with coffee and a sandwich. Heard you got ambushed in that deposition, she said, setting the food on his desk. Word travels fast. Lisa told me. She's friends with Marcus's assistant. Kim sat down across from him. For what it's worth, everyone here knows you didn't manufacture anything. Daniel was good at hiding things, but he wasn't good enough. Patricia Vance thinks I had financial motive. Patricia Vance is a lawyer doing her job. Doesn't mean she believes her own arguments. Kim sipped her coffee. You know what I think? What? I think you scared her. You walked in here with no preparation, no agenda, no skin in the game, and you tore apart a fraud case in 30 minutes. That's the kind of thing that makes defense attorneys nervous because it's hard to discredit genuine competence. Mason smiled despite himself. That's generous. It's accurate. Kim stood to leave, then paused at the door. Charlotte told me about the northern facility, about her offer. I haven't decided yet. Ryan wanted me to tell you something. He said if you take the job, he'd like to work on your team. Said he wants to learn from someone who actually cares about getting things right instead of just looking good on paper. After she left, Mason sat alone in his small office, thinking about teams and trust and the weight of other people's expectations. Taking Charlotte's offer meant responsibility, not just for systems, but for people, for careers and livelihoods, and the kind of leadership that required showing up every day with answers even when you weren't sure. He'd walked away from that once because it conflicted with being the father Sophie needed. Could he do both now? His phone buzzed. A text from Sophie's school. "Mr. Reed, this is Mrs. Henderson. Sophie wrote something in class today that I thought you should see." Attached was a photo of lined paper in Sophie's careful handwriting. "My dad used to build important things that helped people. Then he stopped to take care of me. Some people think he gave up, but I think he just picked something more important. When I grow up, I want to be like him and pick the important things even when they're hard." Mason stared at the message for a long time. Then he stood up, walked down the hall to Charlotte's office, and knocked on her open door. She looked up from her computer. "That was quick thinking." "I have conditions," Mason said. "Name them." "Sophie comes first, always. If she's sick, if there's a school event, if she needs me, I'm gone. No guilt, no questions." "Agreed." "I'm not working weekends. I don't care how urgent the crisis is. Saturday and Sunday are hers." "Done. And I want the authority to build a team my way. Hire people who care about the work, not people who look good on LinkedIn. I want Kim as my deputy and Ryan on the technical team, and I want final say on everyone else." Charlotte smiled. "Anything else?" "Yeah, I want Daniel Mercer prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Not just civil penalties, criminal charges. He stole from you and he tried to destroy my credibility to cover it up. That's not something I'm willing to let slide quietly." Already in motion, the DA's office opened an investigation yesterday. Charlotte stood, extended her hand. "Do we have a deal, Mr. Reed?" Mason shook her hand. "We have a deal, Miss Bennett." "Good. Now get out of here. You've got an hour before school pickup, and you're going to spend it doing something other than work." Mason left the building feeling lighter than he had in days. He drove to the park where he and Sophie went sometimes, sat on a bench overlooking the playground, and called his ex-wife's number for the first time in 4 years. She answered on the third ring. "Hello?" "Jenna, it's Mason." Silence. Then, "Why are you calling?" "I wanted to let you know something. I took a new job. Real job, not gig work. Head of infrastructure for a logistics company. It's going to mean more stability for Sophie." "Okay." Jenna's voice was cautious. "That's good, I guess. I also wanted to tell you that if you ever want to see her, be part of her life, the door's open. I'm not going to keep her from you." More silence. Then Jenna's voice cracked slightly. "I don't know if I can do that." "I know, but the option's there, always." Mason paused. "She's an amazing kid, Jenna. Smart and brave and kind. You'd be proud of her." "I'm sure I would be." A pause. "Mason? I'm sorry for leaving the way I did, for making you choose between your career and being a parent. That wasn't fair." "No," Mason agreed. "It wasn't, but I'd make the same choice again." After he hung up, he sat watching kids play on the swings and thought about choices and consequences and the strange way life circled back on itself. 5 years ago, he'd walked away from everything to be Sophie's father. Now he was walking back into the same industry, but different, older, wiser, with priorities that couldn't be shaken. At 3:30 exactly, he pulled up outside Riverside Elementary. Sophie came running out with Emma Chen beside her, both girls carrying identical origami cranes. "Daddy, can Emma come over?" Sophie asked breathlessly. "Her mom said it's okay if you say yes." Emma's mother was standing nearby, smiling. Mason recognized her from school events, a quiet woman who always looked tired but kind. "That would be great," he said. "I'll bring her home by 6. At the apartment, the girls disappeared into Sophie's room to build something elaborate with blocks, while Mason made snacks in the kitchen. His phone buzzed with messages, Charlotte sending contract details, Kim asking questions about team structure, Marcus with updates on the legal case. But he ignored all of it. Right now, he was just a father whose daughter was laughing in the next room with her friend, and that was enough. When he drove Emma home later, her mother invited him in for coffee. Her name was Linda, and she was an accountant working from home, and she mentioned casually that Emma talked about Sophie constantly, how nice it was that the girls had found each other. Sophie's been good for Emma, Linda said. Helped her feel less alone in a new school. Emma's been good for Sophie too, Mason replied. Sometimes kids need people who understand them. Driving home in the dark, Sophie fell asleep in the back seat clutching Oliver. Mason carried her upstairs, tucked her into bed without waking her, and stood in the doorway watching her breathe the way he'd done 1,000 times before. Tomorrow he'd start building something new. But tonight, he'd already built everything that mattered. The first Monday of Mason's official employment at Bennett Meridian Logistics started with Sophie spilling orange juice all over her school uniform at breakfast and ended with him realizing he'd forgotten what it felt like to be responsible for other people's careers. Between those two moments, there was a staff meeting where 15 engineers stared at him with expressions ranging from skeptical to openly hostile, a budget review that made his head hurt, and a phone call with a supplier who spoke so fast, Mason had to ask him to repeat everything twice. "How was your first day?" Charlotte asked when she found him still at his desk at 3:15. "Overwhelming." Mason was gathering his things, eyes on the clock. "Your engineering team thinks I'm either a fraud or an outsider coming to fire everyone." "Are you going to fire everyone?" "No, but I'm going to reorganize the entire department structure, and that's going to make people nervous." He grabbed his jacket. "Kim's helping, but there's a lot of resistance. Give them time. They'll come around when they see results. Or they'll quit." Charlotte leaned against the doorframe. Then they weren't the right people anyway. You can't build something new with people who are committed to keeping everything the same. Mason left at 3:17, made it to Sophie's school by 3:34, and found her waiting with Emma again. The two girls had apparently decided they were inseparable now, which meant Mason's afternoons involved coordinating pickups and playdates with Linda Chen and learning to cook for two 6-year-olds instead of one. "Can Emma stay for dinner?" Sophie asked that evening. "If her mom says it's okay." Linda did, and Mason found himself making spaghetti for 3 while the girls built an elaborate city out of cardboard boxes in the living room. When Linda came to pick Emma up at 7, she lingered in the doorway. "You're really good with them," she said. I've had practice." "Still, a lot of single dads would just stick them in front of the TV." Linda smiled. Emma's father wasn't really the hands-on type. Before the divorce, I mean. Mason heard the weight behind those words. "How long have you been on your own?" 2 years? You? 4. Does it get easier? Some parts, other parts just get different. Mason watched Sophie and Emma sprawled on the floor, giggling about something only they understood. But they're worth it. "Yeah," Linda agreed quietly, "they really are." After they left, Mason cleaned up dinner and helped Sophie with homework, and read their current bedtime book and tried not to think about the mountain of work waiting for him tomorrow. The Northern Facility project was massive. $40 million, 3 years, everything riding on him not screwing it up. His phone buzzed. "Charlotte." "Stop panicking. I can feel it from here." Mason smiled despite himself. "How do you always know?" "Because I do the same thing." "Welcome to leadership. The anxiety never goes away. You just get better at hiding it. That's encouraging. Want to know a secret? The engineers who are hostile right now will be your strongest advocates in 6 months. The ones who push back are the ones who care enough to fight for what they think is right. You just have to prove you're worth fighting for instead of against." Mason thought about that after she signed off. Thought about the team he was inheriting. Experienced people who'd worked under Daniel's corrupted system and didn't know yet whether Mason was there to fix things or just rearrange the deck chairs. They had every right to be suspicious. The next morning, he called a department meeting. "I know you don't trust me yet," he said, standing in front of 15 skeptical faces. "I'm the outsider who showed up out of nowhere and torpedoed your CFO. From your perspective, I could be corporate's hatchet man here to clean house. So let me be clear about something. I'm not here to fire people. I'm here to build the best infrastructure division in the industry, and I can't do that alone." A senior engineer named David Chen, no relation to Linda, spoke up. "The best division or the most profitable?" "Both. They're not mutually exclusive." Mason pulled up a presentation on the conference room screen. "This is the Northern Facility project, $40 million, state-of-the-art systems, everything designed from scratch. We're going to set new standards for cold chain logistics, and every person in this room has the opportunity to be part of that. What if we don't want to be part of it?" This from a younger engineer named Sarah Park. "What if we liked how things were before? Before Daniel was stealing from the company?" Mason kept his voice level. Or before the monitoring failures that cost us millions? Sarah's face flushed, but she didn't back down. Before some random driver waltzed in and convinced Charlotte we were all incompetent. I never said you were incompetent. I said the systems had vulnerabilities that were being exploited. That's not the same thing. Feels the same when you're the one being audited. Mason nodded. You're right. It does. And I'm sorry the audit process felt like an attack. That wasn't the intention. He looked around the room. Here's what I'm offering. A fresh start. Clean slate. I don't care what happened before I got here as long as it stays in the past. What I care about is whether you're willing to help me build something that actually works. And if we're not, David asked, then you find another job. I won't fire you, but I won't fight to keep you either. Mason met his eyes. I need people who want to be here, who care about doing work that matters. If that's not you, that's fine. But decide fast because we start hiring next week and I'd rather promote from within than bring in strangers. The silence that followed was heavy. Then Kim spoke up from the back of the room. I'm in, she said. I've seen what Mason can do. I want to learn from him. Ryan Torres raised his hand. Me too. Slowly, others started nodding. Not everyone. Sarah Park still looked mutinous, and a couple of senior engineers seemed unconvinced. But enough. Enough to build something with. After the meeting, David Chen pulled Mason aside. That was a good speech, he said. But speeches are easy. Delivering is harder. I know. I worked under 3 different directors before you. They all promised change. They all failed. David crossed his arms. What makes you different? I've actually built these systems before. I know what works and what doesn't, and I don't have a career to protect by playing politics. I'm here to do the job right or not at all. David studied him for a long moment. Kim says you leave every day at 3:30 to pick up your daughter. That's right. And you're going to manage a $40 million project working half days? I'm going to manage it by hiring people I trust and giving them the authority to make decisions without micromanagement. If I'm doing my job right, the project won't fall apart because I'm not in the office 60 hours a week. Mason paused. But if that's a problem for you, say so now. It's not a problem. David smiled slightly. It's actually refreshing. My last director sent emails at 2 a.m. and expected responses within the hour. Burned out half the team. He extended his hand. I'm in. Let's build something that doesn't fall apart. Over the next 2 weeks, Mason threw himself into the Northern Facility project with an intensity that surprised him. He'd forgotten how much he loved this work. The problem solving, the technical challenges, the satisfaction of designing systems that were elegant and efficient and built to last. He hired 3 new engineers, all of them young and hungry and willing to learn. Promoted Kim to deputy director over 2 people with more seniority because she understood that leadership meant serving the team, not commanding it. Moved Ryan to lead technical analyst and watched him blossom under actual mentorship instead of neglect. But the long hours took a toll. By the 3rd week, Mason was exhausted. Getting up at 5 to review project documents before Sophie woke up, working straight through lunch, leaving at 3:30 and then logging back in after she went to bed. The weekends remained sacred. He'd promised Sophie that. But everything else was blurring together. You look terrible, Charlotte said one afternoon when she stopped by his office. Thanks. That's exactly what I needed to hear. I'm serious. When's the last time you slept more than 5 hours? Mason tried to remember. Tuesday? It's Friday. Then Tuesday. Charlotte sat down across from his desk, pushed his laptop closed. Stop. I have a budget review. It can wait. Mason, you're burning out. I can see it happening. Her voice was gentle. This is exactly what happened at Hartwell, isn't it? You pushed too hard trying to prove yourself until there was nothing left for Sophie. That was different. I didn't know how to balance things then. And you think you do now? Charlotte gestured at the coffee cups littering his desk, the dark circles under his eyes, the files stacked everywhere. This isn't balance. This is the same mistake in a different office. Mason wanted to argue but couldn't find the energy. She was right. He'd been so focused on proving he deserved this job, on showing the team he was competent, on making sure the project succeeded, that he'd stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly, stopped doing anything except work and parent. I don't know how else to do this, he admitted quietly. You do it by trusting your team, by delegating, by accepting that you hired good people who can handle things without your constant oversight. Charlotte leaned forward. Kim told me you've been reviewing every single technical specification personally. Why? Because they need to be right. Kim's been doing this for 8 years. She knows how to review specs, let her. But no buts. You're the director now. Your job isn't to do everything yourself. It's to make sure the right people are doing the right things. She stood. Go home. It's only 2 o'clock, I know, but go anyway. Spend the afternoon with Sophie. Rest. Come back Monday with a plan for how to work smarter instead of harder. Mason went home and found Sophie already there. Early dismissal for parent-teacher conferences that he'd completely forgotten about. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a note from her teacher. Mrs. Henderson wants to meet with you, Sophie said, not looking at him. About what? I've been tired at school. She thinks something's wrong. Mason's chest tightened. Have you been tired? You keep working after I go to bed. I hear you typing, and sometimes you look sad in the morning. Sophie's voice was small. Are we okay, Daddy? He pulled her into a hug. We're okay, baby. I've just been working too much. That's going to change. Promise? Promise. The parent-teacher conference happened the next afternoon. Mrs. Henderson was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd taught first grade for 20 years. Sophie's a wonderful student, she said, sitting across from Mason in a tiny chair designed for 6-year-olds. Bright, attentive, kind to other children. But over the past 2 weeks, I've noticed changes. She's falling asleep during reading time. She seems distracted. Yesterday, she cried during recess, and when I asked what was wrong, she said she was worried about you. Mason felt guilt crash over him. I started a new job. It's been demanding. I understand, but Sophie is 6 years old. She shouldn't be carrying adult worries. Mrs. Henderson's voice was gentle but firm. Children need stability and presence. Not perfection, but consistency. Someone who's there and paying attention. I am there. I pick her up every day. Being physically present isn't the same as being emotionally available. If you're exhausted and distracted, Sophie feels that. She pulled out a drawing from a folder. She made this in art class yesterday. The picture showed 2 stick figures, one tall, one small. The tall figure had a laptop. The small figure was holding what looked like Oliver the rabbit. There was a big space between them. Mason stared at it, feeling something crack in his chest. She titled it, Daddy's Working, Mrs. Henderson said quietly. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you because Sophie needs you to know she's struggling with this transition. What do I do? Set boundaries, real ones. Make time that's just for her, where work doesn't exist. Even if it's just 30 minutes before bed where you read together or talk about her day. Mrs. Henderson smiled. You're clearly a devoted father, Mr. Reed. Sophie talks about you constantly, but devotion and presence are different things. She needs both. That evening, Mason sat Sophie down at the kitchen table. I'm sorry, he said. I've been so focused on my new job that I haven't been paying enough attention to you. That's going to change. You don't have to quit again, Sophie said quickly. I know you like the work. I'm not quitting, but I am going to do better about being here when I'm here. No more working after you go to bed. No more being too tired to play. Okay? Okay. Sophie hugged him tight. I was worried you were going to disappear like Mommy did. Mason's heart broke. Never. I'm not going anywhere, baby. I promise. On Monday, Mason walked into Charlotte's office with a new plan. I need to restructure how I'm working, he said. I can't keep doing everything myself. Thank God. I was about to stage an intervention. Charlotte gestured for him to sit. What do you need? Full authority to hire a project manager who can handle the day-to-day logistics. Someone detail-oriented who can coordinate between teams and keep everything on schedule while I focus on the technical design and strategy. Done. Anyone in mind? David Chen recommended someone. His sister, actually. She's currently managing projects at a smaller firm but looking to move up. I'd like to interview her. Set it up. The sister's name was Lisa Chen, different from Charlotte's assistant, and she turned out to be exactly what Mason needed. Organized, efficient, unflappable. She could read a Gantt chart like it was a novel and had a way of getting people to meet deadlines without making them hate her. I need you to understand something, Mason told her during the final interview. I leave at 3:30 every day, no exceptions, which means you'll be handling late afternoon decisions and coordinating with teams across time zones. Are you okay with that? Are you okay with me calling you at 8 p.m. if something urgent comes up? Lisa asked. As long as it's actually urgent and not just convenient. Then we'll get along fine, she smiled. My brother says you're the real deal. That's good enough for me. With Lisa managing the project coordination and Kim handling technical oversight, Mason finally had breathing room. He started leaving work at work, started sleeping 7 hours a night, started being present when Sophie talked to him instead of mentally reviewing system specifications. The change was immediate. Sophie stopped falling asleep at school, started smiling more, brought home drawings that showed two stick figures close together, both of them happy. And somewhere in the midst of all this restructuring and delegation and learning to trust his team, Mason realized something had shifted between him and Charlotte. It started small. Coffee conversations that lasted longer than necessary. Charlotte stopping by his office just to ask how Sophie was doing. Mason noticing details he hadn't before. The way she twisted her pen when she was thinking, the tiny scar on her left hand from a childhood accident she mentioned once. They started having lunch together sometimes. Not talking about work, but about everything else. Books they'd read, places they wanted to travel, the strange experience of being 30-something and still figuring out who they were. I never wanted the company to be my whole life, Charlotte admitted one afternoon. They were eating sandwiches in the small park near Meridian Tower, taking advantage of unseasonably warm November weather. I wanted to build something that mattered, yes, but I also wanted a life outside of boardrooms and investor meetings. What stopped you? Fear, mostly. Fear that if I wasn't working constantly, everything would fall apart. Fear that the moment I took my eye off things, someone would steal it or destroy it or prove I didn't deserve it in the first place. She looked at him. Daniel's betrayal confirmed all of that, made me think I was right to trust nothing except my own vigilance. But you hired me anyway, because you showed me something I'd forgotten, that the people who deserve trust usually aren't the ones demanding it. They're the ones quietly doing the work because it matters, not because someone's watching. Charlotte smiled. You left at 3:30 on the most important day of your consulting career because your daughter needed you. That told me everything about your priorities. Some people would say that makes me unreliable. Some people are idiots. She crumpled her sandwich wrapper. You know what I've learned watching you build your team? Real leadership isn't about working the most hours or making the biggest sacrifices. It's about showing up consistently for the things that matter and trusting other people to do the same. Mason thought about that on the drive to pick up Sophie. Thought about how Charlotte had spent 3 years working 80-hour weeks because she was afraid of appearing weak. How he'd done the same thing at Hartwell until his marriage collapsed. How they'd both learned the hard way that presence without boundaries was just another form of absence. Sophie had Emma with her again when he pulled up to the school. Can we all go to the park? Sophie asked. Emma's mom said she'll meet us there. The park was crowded with after-school kids. Mason and Linda ended up sitting on a bench together while Sophie and Emma played, and somehow the conversation turned personal. Sophie talks about your boss a lot, Linda mentioned. Charlotte, right? Yeah, she's good to work for. Sophie seems to think there's something more there. Mason looked at her, surprised. What did she say? That you smile differently when you talk about Charlotte, that you check your phone a lot to see if she texted. Linda smiled. 6-year-olds notice everything. We're friends. That's all. Okay. Linda didn't sound convinced. But Mason, if it becomes something more, that's okay too. You're allowed to have a life that isn't just about being Sophie's dad. I don't know if I'm ready for that. Nobody's ever ready. You just decide whether it's worth trying. That evening, after Sophie was asleep, Mason found himself thinking about Charlotte, about the way she listened when he talked about Sophie, asked questions that showed she was actually paying attention, remembered small details from previous conversations, about how she'd bought an abandoned warehouse just to give him a project that mattered, about how she'd become the first person besides Sophie who made him want to show up as his full self instead of just the parts that were useful. His phone buzzed. Charlotte. Random question. Do you like Thai food? Love it. Why? There's a place near my apartment that makes the best pad see ew in the city. I've been craving it all day, but eating alone is depressing. Want to join me for dinner tomorrow? After Sophie's bedtime, obviously. Mason stared at the message. It wasn't a date. It was just dinner between colleagues, friends, two people who enjoyed each other's company sharing a meal. Except it felt like more than that. I'll need to find a sitter, he typed back. Kim's mom. She already offered. I asked her this afternoon if she'd be available. You planned this. I'm a CEO. I plan everything. So is that a yes? Mason thought about Linda's words, about being allowed to have a life that wasn't just about being Sophie's dad, about whether it was worth trying. Yes, he typed. That's a yes. The next evening, he dropped Sophie at Kim's mother's house with her overnight bag and Oliver the rabbit. She went in excitedly, already friends with Kim's kids from previous playdates. You look nervous, Mrs. Torres observed. Is it that obvious? Honey, you're wearing cologne. When's the last time you wore cologne to pick up Thai food? Mason smiled despite himself. It's just dinner. Sure it is, Mrs. Torres patted his arm. Have fun. Sophie will be fine. The restaurant was small and intimate, tucked into a side street Charlotte had somehow found despite living in the city for years. She was already there when he arrived, sitting at a corner table wearing jeans and a soft sweater that made her look younger and less intimidating than her usual power suits. You made it, she said, smiling. Traffic wasn't too bad. They ordered too much food and talked about everything except work. Charlotte told him about growing up in Boston, daughter of two professors who expected excellence and got frustrated when she chose business over academia. Mason told her about Sophie's obsession with space and how he'd been reading astronomy books just to keep up with her questions. She sounds extraordinary, Charlotte said. She is, terrifying sometimes, but extraordinary. Like her father. Mason laughed. I'm not terrifying. You expose systematic fraud in 30 minutes. That's pretty terrifying from a criminal's perspective. Charlotte's expression turned more serious. Can I ask you something personal? Sure. Do you regret it? Walking away from your career, giving up everything you'd built? Mason thought about the question. Sometimes I wonder what my life would look like if I'd made different choices, whether I'd be running my own firm or teaching at a university or working on some massive infrastructure project. But regret? He shook his head. No, because none of those hypothetical achievements would matter if Sophie had grown up thinking her father chose work over her. That's what my parents did, Charlotte said quietly. Chose their careers over being present. I spent my childhood in libraries and after-school programs because they were both too busy with research and publications to pick me up. I told myself I'd be different when I had kids, that I'd make time, be present, actually show up. She looked down at her plate. But then I built this company and I became exactly like them. Too busy for relationships, too focused on success to notice I was alone. You're not alone now. No. She met his eyes. I'm not. The moment stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them was quite ready to say. Then Charlotte's phone buzzed and she glanced at it. Victor Hale, she said. Probably checking in on the Northern Facility progress. On a Tuesday night? He doesn't really believe in off hours. She silenced the phone. But he can wait. Tonight I'm just having dinner with a friend. They stayed until the restaurant closed, talking and laughing and discovering how easy it was to be around each other when the weight of work wasn't pressing down. When Mason finally drove Charlotte back to her building, she hesitated before getting out of the car. Thank you, she said. For tonight, for reminding me that life exists outside conference rooms. Anytime. Mason? She turned to look at him. I'm really glad you answered my driver request that morning, even if I was a nightmare client. You weren't that bad. I ignored you for 30 minutes while screaming at executives on the phone. Okay, you were a little bad. Mason smiled. But you got better. Charlotte laughed, and the sound of it made something warm settle in his chest. Then she leaned across the console and kissed him on the cheek, quick and soft, and over before he could process it. Good night, Mason, she said, and disappeared into her building before he could respond. He sat in the car for a long moment, touching his cheek where she'd kissed him, and wondered what the hell he was doing. He had a daughter to raise and a massive project to manage, and a life carefully constructed around not getting complicated. But Charlotte Bennett made him want complicated, made him want late dinners and easy conversations, and the possibility of something more than just friendship. His phone buzzed, a text from her. That wasn't weird, was it? The kiss thing. I probably should have asked first. Mason smiled, typed back. It wasn't weird. Good. Because I'd like to do it again sometime. The dinner part, I mean. And maybe the kiss part too, if that's okay. It's okay, Mason wrote, and felt his carefully controlled life tilt sideways into territory he hadn't explored in 5 years, wondering if maybe, just maybe, he was ready for it now. Mason didn't tell Sophie about the dinner with Charlotte, didn't mention the kiss or the text messages that followed, or the way his stomach did something complicated whenever his phone buzzed with her name. 6-year-olds had a way of making assumptions, and he wasn't ready to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. But Sophie noticed anyway. Of course she did. You keep smiling at your phone, she said one morning over breakfast. Is Charlotte sending you funny pictures? Just work stuff, baby. Work stuff isn't funny. You're smiling the way Emma's mom smiled when that man came to pick her up last week. Sophie took a bite of cereal, studying him with those two observant gray eyes. Do you like Charlotte? Mason nearly choked on his coffee. She's my boss. That's not what I asked. Eat your breakfast. We're going to be late. Sophie grinned like she'd won something and went back to her cereal, humming. Mason made a mental note to have a conversation with Linda Chen about what exactly her daughter was telling Sophie about adult relationships. The Northern Facility project was moving faster than expected. Lisa Chen had proven to be a force of nature, coordinating suppliers and contractors with the efficiency of someone conducting an orchestra. The building permits had cleared in record time. Charlotte's lawyers had handled that, and construction crews were already breaking ground on the site. Mason spent his days designing monitoring systems that would set new industry standards, working with a team that had finally stopped looking at him like an intruder and started treating him like a leader worth following. David Chen brought him problems instead of complaints. Sarah Park, who'd been openly hostile the first week, now stayed late voluntarily to review technical specifications because she'd gotten genuinely excited about the project's scope. You're building something real here, Kim told him one afternoon. They were standing at the Northern Facility site, watching construction crews pour foundation. The team respects you. That's not easy to earn. I just stopped trying to do everything myself. That's exactly why they respect you. You trust them. Kim smiled. Also, for what it's worth, everyone knows you're seeing Charlotte. Mason's head snapped toward her. It's not. Please, she lights up every time you walk into a room. You check your phone constantly. It's obvious. Kim pulled her jacket tighter against the December wind. I think it's nice, honestly. You both work too hard. You deserve something good. It's complicated. Everything worth having is complicated. She started walking back toward the car. Just don't overthink it. That's your problem, Mason. You analyze everything to death instead of just letting things happen. That evening, Charlotte texted asking if he wanted to grab coffee after he dropped Sophie at school. Mason said yes before he could talk himself out of it. They met at a place near Meridian Tower, one of those independent cafes with mismatched furniture and baristas who took their coffee seriously. Charlotte was already there, looking tired but happy. Rough morning? Mason asked, sitting across from her. Victor Hale called at 6 to discuss the quarterly projections. Apparently, billionaire investors don't believe in reasonable hours. She sipped her latte. But the projections are good. Revenue's up 18%, operational efficiency has improved across the board, and the Northern Facility is ahead of schedule. He's impressed. That's your doing, not mine. It's our doing. You fixed the infrastructure problems that were bleeding money. I just made sure the board noticed. Charlotte set down her cup. I've been thinking about something. What's that? When the Northern Facility is finished, I want to expand the model to 3 other regions, build a network of state-of-the-art distribution centers that set the standard for the entire industry. She looked at him. But I can't do that with you working until 3:30 every day. Mason felt his chest tighten. We had an agreement. I'm not asking you to break it. I'm asking if you'd consider bringing Sophie into the office sometimes. Not every day, but maybe 1 or 2 afternoons a week. We could set up a space for her to do homework. She could meet the team, see what her dad actually does. Charlotte spoke quickly, like she'd been planning this speech. I know it's unconventional, but I've been watching how you balance everything. And I keep thinking, why do we make parents choose between being present for their kids and being present for their work? Why can't both exist in the same space? Mason stared at her. You want to turn Bennett Meridian into a place where employees can bring their kids to work? I want to create a culture where people don't have to sacrifice their families to have careers. Where someone like you doesn't have to leave at 3:30 because we're too rigid to accommodate real life. She leaned forward. You've changed how I see leadership, Mason. Made me realize that the best people aren't the ones willing to give up everything else. They're the ones who refuse to, because having a life outside work makes them better at the work itself. That's a big shift for a company like this. I know, but I think it's the right one. Charlotte smiled slightly. Besides, I'd like to meet Sophie properly. She sounds remarkable. Mason thought about it. About Sophie sitting in a corner of his office, doing homework while he reviewed system designs. About her meeting Kim and David and the rest of the team, seeing him as something other than just her father. About the possibility of not having to compartmentalize his life into separate boxes that never touched. Let me talk to her, he said. See what she thinks. Sophie's reaction was predictable. I get to see where you work? Really? If you want to. You'd need to be quiet while I'm in meetings, and you'd have to bring homework to do. I'll bring all my homework, and my space books, and Oliver. She was already planning. Can I meet Charlotte? Probably. Does she know I punched Tommy Martinez? I have no idea why that would come up. I just want her to know I can defend myself, in case she tries to hurt you. Mason couldn't help laughing. Charlotte's not going to hurt me, baby. You don't know that. Emma's mom said her dad seemed nice too, and then he left. Sophie's expression turned serious. I don't want you to be sad like Emma's mom was sad. Mason pulled her into a hug. I'm not going to be sad. And Charlotte's not like that. She's different. Different good or different weird? Different good. Okay. Sophie pulled back, studying his face with that unnerving intensity she'd inherited from him. But if she makes you cry, I'm going to punch her too. Please don't punch my boss. I'm just saying, nobody makes my dad cry. Sophie came to the office the following Tuesday. Mason set her up in the corner of his workspace with her homework and coloring books, and she settled in like she'd been doing this her whole life. When Kim stopped by, Sophie looked up and said, You must be Ms. Torres. My dad says you're really smart. Kim melted immediately. And you must be Sophie. Your dad talks about you constantly. I know. He's pretty obsessed with me. Sophie said it matter-of-factly, the way she said everything. Do you have kids? 2. They're a little older than you. Do they like space? I really like space. Within 10 minutes, Kim had promised to introduce Sophie to her kids and lent her a book about the Mars rovers. David Chen stopped by and ended up explaining how GPS satellites worked. Sarah Park showed her pictures of the northern facility construction. By the time Charlotte appeared in the doorway at 2:30, Sophie had charmed half the department. So you're the famous Sophie, Charlotte said, crouching down to eye level. Sophie studied her carefully. You're Charlotte. You bought my dad a warehouse. I did. It's going to be pretty amazing when we're done with it. My dad says you're really good at your job. He's pretty good at his job, too. I know. Sophie glanced at Mason, then back at Charlotte. Are you going to marry him? Mason nearly dropped his coffee. Sophie. What? Emma says when grown-ups have dinner alone, it means they're going to get married. I'm just asking. Charlotte handled it better than Mason expected, fighting back a smile. Your dad and I are friends right now. Is that okay with you? Sophie considered this. I guess. But if you do decide to marry him, I should probably meet you more first, to make sure you're nice. That seems fair. And you have to promise not to make him work too much. He gets tired and then he's not fun. I promise. Charlotte extended her hand. Deal? Sophie shook it solemnly. Deal. Also, I punched a kid at school once, just so you know I can defend people if I need to. Good to know. Charlotte stood, met Mason's eyes over Sophie's head. Her expression was warm and amused, and something else he couldn't quite name. I'll let you get back to work. Nice meeting you properly, Sophie. After she left, Sophie returned to her coloring. I like her. She didn't talk to me like I'm stupid. Most people don't think you're stupid, baby. Some adults do. They use weird voices and ask dumb questions. Sophie picked up a purple crayon. Charlotte talked to me normal. That's good. The weeks that followed fell into a new rhythm. Sophie came to the office twice a week, becoming a fixture in the infrastructure department. The team took to her immediately. She was quiet, well-behaved, and asked questions that showed she was actually paying attention to what they did. And slowly, carefully, Mason and Charlotte's relationship shifted into something more than friendship. It happened in small moments. Charlotte staying late on the evening Sophie was there, the three of them grabbing dinner together. Weekend texts that had nothing to do with work. Charlotte showing up at Sophie's school play in December, sitting beside Mason in the auditorium and whispering commentary that made him fight to keep from laughing. After the play, Sophie ran up to them both, still wearing her costume as reindeer number 3. "Did you see me?" she asked breathlessly. "You were the best reindeer," Charlotte said seriously. "Very convincing antler work." Sophie beamed. Then she looked between them and said, "You're holding hands." Mason glanced down. She was right. Somewhere during the performance, his hand had found Charlotte's. "Is that okay?" Charlotte asked Sophie. Sophie thought about it for a long moment. Then she grabbed both their hands and started pulling them toward the exit. "Come on, Emma's mom is taking us for ice cream, and she said you could come too." At the ice cream shop, Mason found himself sitting in a booth with Sophie on one side and Charlotte on the other, across from Linda Chen and Emma. It felt surreal and domestic and terrifying in equal measure. "So you're the famous Charlotte," Linda said, smiling. "Emma's told me a lot about you." "Has she?" Charlotte looked amused. "She says Sophie says her dad likes you a lot, and you have an important job, and sometimes you buy Sophie books about space." "Guilty on all counts," Charlotte glanced at Mason. "Sophie's easy to buy books for. She has excellent taste." After ice cream, Mason walked Charlotte to her car. Sophie was safely occupied helping Emma build a snowman in the coffee shop's courtyard under Linda's supervision. "Your daughter is remarkable," Charlotte said. "Terrifying, but remarkable. She likes you. That's rare." "What about you?" Charlotte turned to face him. "Do you like me?" "I think you know the answer to that." "I'd like to hear you say it anyway." Mason looked at her, this brilliant, fierce woman who'd bought him a warehouse and restructured her company's culture and showed up to his daughter's school play. Who made him want to believe that having both a career and a life wasn't just possible, but right? "I like you," he said, "more than I've liked anyone in a very long time." Charlotte smiled, reached up and kissed him properly this time. Not quick and hesitant like before, but slow and certain. When they broke apart, she was still smiling. "Good," she said, "because I'm falling for you, Mason Reed, and I wanted to make sure you were on board before I completely lost my head over this." "I'm on board." "Good," she said again, and kissed him once more before Sophie's voice called out from across the parking lot. "Dad, Emma and I need help with the snowman's head." The trial against Daniel Mercer happened in January. Mason had to testify, they all did. But this time Patricia Vance couldn't attack his credibility because the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, system logs, testimony from Ryan Torres about the stolen credentials, statements from suppliers who'd been part of the insurance fraud scheme. Daniel's defense collapsed in 3 days. The jury took 4 hours to convict him on all counts: fraud, embezzlement, theft, conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in prison and ordered him to pay full restitution to Bennett Meridian Logistics. Charlotte stood outside the courthouse afterward, talking to reporters about corporate accountability and the importance of transparency. Mason waited in the background, watching her handle the press with the same fierce competence she brought to everything. When she finally broke away, she found him leaning against the car. "It's over," she said. "How do you feel?" "Relieved. Angry that it happened at all. Grateful it's done." She leaned against the car beside him. "Victor called during the lunch recess. He wants to triple his investment. Says watching us expose fraud and rebuild the company in 6 months was the best due diligence he could have asked for." "That's good news." "It's incredible news. We'll be able to expand to 5 regions instead of 3, build everything faster, hire more people." She looked at him. "I'm going to need a COO who understands operations and infrastructure, someone who knows how to build systems and lead teams and isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong." Mason raised an eyebrow. "You offering me another promotion?" "I'm offering you a partnership, equal say in how this company grows, your name on the letterhead." Charlotte's voice was serious now. "I can't do this alone, Mason. I don't want to. You've shown me what this company could be, not just profitable, but good. A place where people want to work because we actually care about them." I have a condition. Name it. We implement flexible scheduling company-wide. Not just for me, for everyone. Parents who need to leave early, employees with family obligations, anyone who needs to balance life and work. We make it standard policy. Charlotte smiled. Deal. What else? On-site childcare. Professional, high quality, available to all employees. We make it possible for people to be parents and professionals without having to sacrifice one for the other. Done. I've already been talking to contractors about converting the third floor. And one more thing. Mason turned to face her properly. I want you to take Sundays off. Real off. No emails, no work calls, no emergency meetings unless someone's literally dying. That's going to be hard. I know. But you're asking me to help you build something sustainable. Sustainable includes you not burning out. He took her hand. We're partners now, which means I get to call you out when you're working yourself to death. Charlotte laughed, squeezed his hand. Okay, Sunday's off, but you have to do something for me too. What's that? Stop acting like you don't deserve this. The job, the success, the life you're building. You walked away from your career for the right reasons, and now you're walking back into it on your own terms. That's not lucky. That's earned. Mason didn't know what to say to that. Spent 5 years thinking of himself as someone who'd failed at balancing career and family, who'd made the noble choice but lost something irreplaceable in the process. Charlotte was reframing it as strength instead of sacrifice, and he wasn't sure how to hold that shift. Come on, Charlotte said, pulling him toward the car. We're picking up Sophie and taking her somewhere celebratory. Where does a 6-year-old want to go to celebrate justice being served? Probably the Science Museum? Perfect. I haven't been to a science museum in 20 years. They picked Sophie up from Kim's mother's house and drove to the museum together. Sophie ran ahead through the exhibits, explaining facts about dinosaurs and space and the human brain with the confidence of someone who'd memorized every display. Charlotte asked questions and listened to the answers like they mattered, and Mason watched them together and felt something settle in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Like maybe he hadn't given up anything after all. Like maybe he'd just been waiting for the right people to build something with. In the planetarium, Sophie sat between them while stars wheeled overhead, and the narrator explained the death of massive stars, how they collapsed and exploded and scattered elements across the universe that would eventually form new solar systems, new planets, new possibilities. Everything ends, the narrator said, but nothing is ever really lost. It just transforms into something different. Sophie leaned against Mason's shoulder, half asleep. Charlotte reached across and took his hand in the darkness. And Mason thought about transformation, about careers that ended and began again, about families that fell apart and reformed differently, about people who found each other at exactly the right moment to build something neither could have created alone. The Northern facility opened in March, 6 months ahead of schedule. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew industry press and competitors and suppliers who wanted to see what Bennett Meridian had built. Victor Hale flew in personally, bringing 2 other investors he'd convinced to fund the expansion. Mason stood beside Charlotte on the platform, looking out at the crowd, and remembered the morning he'd driven her downtown in his aging sedan, how she'd ignored him while arguing with executives, how he'd asked one question about a northern corridor and changed both their lives. Nervous? Charlotte whispered. Terrified. Good. Means you care. She squeezed his hand once, quickly, then stepped up to the microphone. Her speech was good, talking about innovation and accountability and building for the future. But when she introduced Mason as the company's new COO and the architect of everything they'd accomplished, the applause felt surreal. Mason's speech was shorter. He thanked the team by name, Kim and David and Sarah and Ryan and Lisa Chen, and everyone who'd trusted him when they had every reason not to. Talked about building systems that served people instead of the other way around. About creating workplaces where showing up whole, with families and lives and priorities beyond profit, made you better at your job, not worse. We're proving something here, he said, that success doesn't require sacrifice, that companies can be profitable and humane, that the best work happens when people feel valued instead of exploited. He paused. And if we can do it here, others can do it everywhere else. That's what makes this matter. After the ceremony, after the photos and the press interviews and the endless handshakes, Mason found Sophie waiting near the entrance with Linda and Emma. Charlotte had arranged for them to attend, had made sure Sophie had a front row seat to watch her father accept recognition for work that mattered. You were good up there, Sophie said, hugging him. Yeah? Yeah. You looked happy. She pulled back, studying his face. Are you happy, Daddy? Mason glanced over at Charlotte, who was talking with Victor Hale, but watching him over the investor's shoulder. Looked at the facility they'd built together, the team that had believed in him, the career he'd rebuilt on his own terms. Looked at Sophie herself, 6 years old and brilliant and loved beyond measure. Yeah, baby, he said. I'm happy. That evening, after dropping Sophie at home with a sitter, Mason and Charlotte went back to her apartment. They'd been dating for 2 months now, long enough that Sophie had stopped asking when Charlotte was coming over and started just expecting it. Long enough that Mason kept a toothbrush at Charlotte's place, and she had clothes at his apartment. Long enough that they'd started talking about futures that extended beyond project timelines. I've been thinking, Charlotte said. They were on her couch, her head on his shoulder, both of them exhausted from the day. About what comes next? The regional expansion? After that? After everything. She sat up, looked at him directly. I want to step back eventually. Not retire completely, but transition to board oversight instead of daily operations. Let someone else run things. Mason raised an eyebrow. That doesn't sound like you. The old me, no, but I've learned some things this year. She smiled slightly. I've learned that building a company is important, but living a life is more important. That success is meaningless if you're alone at the end of the day. That the best thing I can do for Bennett Meridian is make sure it doesn't need me to survive. When are you thinking? 2 years, maybe 3. Long enough to get the expansion running smoothly and train a successor. She paused. I was hoping you'd be that successor. Charlotte, hear me out. You understand the operations better than anyone. The team respects you. You've already proven you can lead. She took his hand. And I think you'd be good at it. Better than me, honestly, because you care about people in ways I'm still learning. Mason thought about it. About running a company while still making it home by 3:30. About building something that valued balance over burnout. About the possibility of creating a model other companies would copy, the way they'd copied his monitoring systems years ago. What would you do, he asked, if you stepped back? Travel? Read books that aren't about business? Spend time with people I care about without always having one eye on my phone? Charlotte smiled. Maybe get to know a certain 6-year-old better, if her father doesn't mind. I think she'd like that. What about you? Would you like that? Mason pulled her close, kissed her temple. Yeah, I'd like that a lot. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Charlotte said quietly, I've been thinking about something else too. What's that? Sophie asked me last week if I was going to be her mom someday. Mason went very still. What did you say? I said that was up to her dad and me to figure out together, that I cared about both of you a lot, but big decisions took time. Charlotte looked at him. Was that okay? It was perfect. Mason's throat felt tight. What do you want, if we're being honest? Honestly, I want mornings where I wake up next to you. I want to help Sophie with her science homework and attend her school plays and teach her things I wish someone had taught me. I want Sunday breakfasts and family dinners and all the boring, ordinary moments that make up a life. She paused. I want to build something with you that has nothing to do with business and everything to do with being happy. That's a big change from where you were 6 months ago. You're a big change from where I was 6 months ago. Charlotte smiled. You showed up in a faded blue shirt, driving an old car, and you changed everything. Made me see people instead of resources. Made me want a life instead of just a career. Made me believe that having both was possible. Mason thought about the morning he'd accepted that last-minute driver request. How he'd been exhausted and worried about money and wondering if he'd made the wrong choice walking away from engineering. How Charlotte had been stressed and focused and certain that success meant working harder than everyone else. How neither of them had known that a 30-minute car ride would unravel everything they thought they understood about work and worth and what actually mattered. I love you, he said. The words surprised him. He hadn't planned to say them yet, but they were true. Charlotte's eyes went bright. Yeah? Yeah. I love you, and I want all of those things too. The mornings and the homework and the boring, ordinary moments. He cupped her face in his hands. I want to build a life with you. Not someday. Now. She kissed him, and it tasted like promises and possibilities. and the strange relief of finally being fully seen by someone who understood both your strengths and your scars. "Should we tell Sophie?" Charlotte asked when they broke apart. "Probably. She's been planning our wedding since the school play." Charlotte laughed. "Of course she has." They told Sophie the next morning over pancakes. Mason had been nervous about how to explain it, but Charlotte just looked at her across the table and said, "Your dad and I love each other. We want to be a family together, if that's okay with you." Sophie considered this seriously. "Will you live here, or will we live at your place?" "We'll have to figure that out." "Can I still do homework at the office?" "Absolutely." "And we'll still go to the park on Saturdays?" "Every Saturday," Mason confirmed. Sophie looked between them, processing. Then she said, "Okay, but I have some rules." Charlotte bit back a smile. "Let's hear them." "Rule 1. Nobody works on Sundays. That's family day." "Agreed." "Rule 2. I get to help plan stuff. Like if we move or if there's a wedding or anything big. I should have opinions." "Fair enough." "Rule 3. Oliver comes to the wedding. He's part of the family too." "Obviously." Charlotte was trying very hard not to laugh. Sophie nodded, satisfied. "Okay, then yes, we can be a family." She took a bite of pancake, then added casually, "Emma's going to be so jealous. She said her dad won't even call her mom back." After breakfast, Charlotte pulled Mason aside in the kitchen. "That went well," she said. "She's had this planned for weeks. I think she has a Pinterest board." "Of course she does." Charlotte wrapped her arms around his waist. "So we're really doing this. We're really doing this. I'm going to be terrible at the domestic stuff. I can't cook, and I'm not great with emotions, and sometimes I get too focused on work. And I'm going to leave dirty socks everywhere and forget important dates and probably drive you crazy with my need to analyze everything." Mason kissed her forehead. "We'll figure it out together." The wedding happened in June, small and private in the park where Mason and Sophie went sometimes. Kim stood as Charlotte's maid of honor. David Chen was Mason's best man. Sophie wore a purple dress she'd picked out herself and held Oliver the entire ceremony, and when the officiant asked if anyone had objections, she raised her hand and said, "I just want everyone to know this was my idea first." The guests laughed. Charlotte wiped away tears. Mason pulled both of them close and thought about transformation, about people and companies and lives that fell apart and rebuilt themselves into something different and better. After the ceremony, Victor Hale pulled Mason aside. "I've been watching what you've built here," the investor said. "Not just the infrastructure, the culture. It's remarkable. Charlotte deserves most of the credit. You both do, and I want to fund it." Victor smiled at Mason's confusion. "I'm putting together an investment group focused on companies that prioritize sustainable practices, both environmental and human. Work-life balance, flexible scheduling, on-site childcare, all of it. I want you and Charlotte to consult on establishing standards other companies can follow. We're not experts. You're exactly the experts I need. People who've actually implemented these policies and made them work." Victor handed him a business card. "Think about it. The world needs more companies like Bennett Meridian. You could help build them." Mason tucked the card in his pocket, thinking about legacy and impact and the difference between building systems and building culture. About whether the choices he'd made, walking away, coming back, refusing to compromise on what mattered, could become a model instead of just a personal victory. Later, during the reception, he found Charlotte dancing with Sophie, both of them laughing. Watched Linda Chen dancing with her daughters nearby. Saw Kim and her family, David and his sister Lisa, Sarah Park with her partner, Ryan Torres with his girlfriend. Saw the team they'd built, not just employees, but people with lives and families and priorities beyond quarterly earnings. "You did this," Charlotte said when he joined them on the dance floor. "You showed me what was possible. We did this together." "Yeah," she smiled, pulled him close. "We did." That night, after Sophie was asleep in her new bedroom in the house they'd bought together, big enough for all of them, with a yard for playdates and a study where Mason could work from home, Charlotte and Mason sat on the back porch watching stars appear. "Do you ever think about that morning?" Charlotte asked. "When I hired you to drive me downtown?" "All the time. I was so stressed, so certain my whole world was falling apart. It was falling apart. Daniel had been stealing for months." "But that's not what I mean." Charlotte turned to look at him. "I was falling apart. Running a company I'd built to prove something to parents who didn't care. Working myself to death because I thought that's what success required. Categorizing everyone as either useful or invisible. You've changed. Because you showed me another way. She took his hand. You were invisible to me that morning. Just another driver passing through my busy life. And then you asked one question and everything shifted. Mason thought about invisibility, about the 5 years he'd spent deliberately staying unseen, driving strangers and working gig jobs, and raising his daughter in the quiet spaces between other people's important lives. About how he'd thought that walking away from his career meant becoming less, mattering less, contributing less. But maybe he'd been wrong about that. Maybe those years hadn't been about becoming invisible. They'd been about learning to see what actually mattered, about understanding that the most extraordinary things happened in ordinary moments, in school pickups and bedtime stories, and choosing to be present for the people who needed you. And maybe that's what he'd brought to Bennett Meridian. Not just technical expertise or system design, but the perspective of someone who'd stepped back and learned that success without purpose was just expensive loneliness. I was invisible, Mason said quietly, but I wasn't gone. I was just somewhere else for a while, learning things I needed to know. And now? Now I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Charlotte rested her head on his shoulder. Inside the house, they could hear Sophie talking in her sleep. Something about astronauts and Mars rovers and building colonies in space. The sound of dreams forming in the mind of someone who believed anything was possible. She's going to change the world, Charlotte said. I know. Think we'll be ready for it? Mason smiled. Probably not, but we'll figure it out together. They sat in comfortable silence as night deepened around them, and Mason thought about the strange circuitous path that had led him here, about the career he'd walked away from and the one he'd built anew, about the marriage that had collapsed and the family that had formed in its wake, about the morning he'd accepted a driver request and changed 2 lives without knowing it. People talked about success like it was a straight line, education, career, achievement, more achievement, until you reached some pinnacle and could finally rest. But Mason's path had been nothing like that. It had been a walk away and a walk back, a loss and a discovery, a choice to prioritize one thing and then learning that prioritizing it made everything else possible. He'd thought walking away from engineering meant giving up his career forever. Instead, it had taught him how to build companies that valued people, had given him the perspective to see what Charlotte couldn't, that systems were meaningless if the humans running them were breaking under the pressure. And now they were building something together that proved both were possible. That you could have a family and a career, success and balance, achievement and presence. That the best work came from people who showed up whole instead of fractured, who refused to sacrifice everything else on the altar of productivity. It wouldn't change the whole world overnight. Other companies would still demand 80-hour weeks and punish people for having lives. But it was a start, a model, proof that another way existed. Inside, Sophie called out in her sleep. Not a nightmare, just a question about stars. Mason went to her, sat on the edge of her bed until she settled again, then returned to the porch where Charlotte was waiting. Everything okay? She asked. Everything's perfect. And it was. Not because everything was easy or simple or smoothly resolved, not because they'd solved all their problems or figured out every answer, but because they were building something together that mattered. A company, a family, a life that valued the right things. Mason Reed had started that Tuesday morning 5 years ago as a brilliant engineer who was about to lose everything, had become a struggling single father who thought he'd given up his future to save his daughters, and had ended up here, COO of a thriving company, husband to a woman he loved, father to a remarkable kid who was going to build colonies on Mars someday. The journey between those versions of himself hadn't been straight or simple, but every step had been necessary. Every choice had mattered. Every moment of choosing Sophie over ambition had taught him something that made him better at both. And sitting on his back porch on a June evening, watching stars emerge while his daughter dreamed and his wife planned tomorrow's meetings, and the future stretched out before them full of possibility, Mason understood finally that he hadn't sacrificed anything at all. He'd just been building something different than he'd planned, something better than he'd imagined, something that proved the most important question wasn't whether you could have it all, but whether you were brave enough to define what all actually meant. For him, it meant this house, this family, this life built from careful choices and refused compromises, and the courage to walk away from what everyone said mattered, so he could build something that actually did. And if a struggling single father could become a successful executive without sacrificing the parts of himself that mattered most, then maybe anyone could. Maybe the whole broken system of work and worth and what it meant to be successful was ready to transform into something better. Maybe it just needed people brave enough to show it was possible. Mason looked at Charlotte, at the home they'd built together, at the future they were creating. And he smiled, because for the first time in 5 years, he wasn't just surviving or sacrificing or holding on until things got better. He was living, fully, completely, exactly as himself. And that, he thought, was worth more than any career achievement or financial success or recognition could ever be. That was what it meant to win.